My name is Mike, and this happened last year when my fiance and I bought our first starter home together. We're an Asian couple, which is relevant to the story. It was a small 2-story house in a basic suburban town in Georgia. There was nothing special about it, but to us it was supposed to be special. It was a typical quiet street, decent backyard, cheap fence, and regular-looking houses lined up next to each other. We felt lucky to even buy a house at our age, so it was a very exciting point in our lives that was quite literally robbed from us, which you'll soon hear why. The first few days were normal. We unpacked, met a few neighbors, and tried to settle in. The neighbor on our right side was a friendly older couple. The neighbor across the street waved and came across to say hi when he saw us. But the house on our left side was different. We didn't see anyone come out of it for the first few days. The curtains were always shut. The house looked clean and normal, don't get me wrong, but it was always kind of dark inside, like no one was home even though there was a car in the driveway. The only time we noticed anything was when we saw someone standing inside their front window one afternoon. My fiancée and I were carrying groceries in from the car when she whispered something to me about it. I looked over and saw a man standing behind the curtain, only half visible but totally watching us. He didn't wave. As soon as he saw us glance at him, he walked away from the window. It was weird, but we didn't think too much about it. Some people are just quiet or awkward. Over the next week, we started noticing him more often. Not outside, but inside his house. I would catch him standing in his living room window sometimes when I left for work. My fiancée told me she saw him in the upstairs window once when she was getting the mail. Every time we noticed him, he seemed to be watching us, but never in a way where he stayed long. The second we looked back, he was gone. One night, something happened that made both of us uneasy in a way we couldn't ignore. Around midnight, I was getting ready for bed when I walked past our upstairs window. Our bedroom window faced directly toward his house. When I looked, out of habit, I saw him in his upstairs window. This time he wasn't halfway hidden or standing behind a curtain. He was fully visible. He stood straight up with his face turned toward our bedroom window. I froze for a second because I wasn't sure if I was actually seeing it right, but the second he realized I saw him, he stepped back away from the window. I remember saying to my fiancée with a laugh, "Oh great, our neighbor's a creep." The next morning, the man came to our door. It was the first time we saw him outside. He knocked politely and introduced himself as Gordon. He apologized for looking like he was spying the night before. He told me he had been putting something on his window ledge and didn't mean to look into our room. He smiled the whole time, and it was a welcoming enough smile to give me a bit of relief. I'm not saying I loved the guy instantly. There was definitely something slightly off about him, but the apology was appreciated. I didn't want to be rude, so I told him it was fine. When I went back inside, I told my fiancé he seemed somewhat nice, but a little weird. We decided to forget about it. A week later, something else happened that we couldn't ignore. In the middle of the night, my fiancée shook me awake, telling me she heard someone in the yard. I was half asleep, but I got up to check the window. Gotta do what you gotta do as the man of the house. When I looked outside, I saw someone walking in our yard. Unless it was fucking Bigfoot, it was definitely a person. A full-grown man walking around like he was looking for something. My first reaction was to shout out "hey," even though I knew that wasn't the smartest thing to do. As soon as I yelled, the person walked fast toward the gate and slammed it shut behind him. Since we didn't have anything in the backyard yet besides some gardening tools, I didn't think someone was trying to steal anything, and I didn't bother to check the backyard. I did check the front windows though, and didn't see anyone. I didn't go outside because I didn't feel safe, and eventually, my fiancée and I went back to sleep, even though we felt uneasy. A few nights after that, the same thing happened again. My fiancée woke me up, telling me she heard rustling outside. This time we both heard it clearly. It sounded like someone was shimmying something. I can't say what, but best description I could give was some kind of lock. I went to the window again, and sure enough, I saw someone in the backyard. I felt my whole body tense up this time. I yelled that I was calling the cops. The person walked out of the yard and again slammed the gate the same way, but this time I saw enough of the man's face and posture to know it looked exactly like Gordon. I yelled "Gordon," but he didn't respond. He just walked away like nothing happened. This time I went outside. I checked the yard, then the sides of the house. I took a deep breath and told myself I have to confront this now. I walked over to Gordon's house and knocked. He answered within seconds, which told me he was awake the whole time. He smiled like he always did and started laughing while telling me that it was him in the yard. He said he was chasing away kids who always jumped the fences in the neighborhood, and he caught them jumping from his backyard into our backyard. He said it happens all the time and told me I'd get used to it. He kept smiling the whole time, but something about the smile didn't feel normal. It felt like something was behind it. I saw hate in his eyes, I swear. I didn't argue with him. I just told him I understood and went back home. But deep down, I didn't believe a word he said. The next day, he came over again and invited us to come to his house for Chinese food the next night, which would be a Friday. We felt like saying yes would at least clear the awkwardness between us and we could just be cordial neighbors. We went to his house around 7 p.m. that Friday. The second we walked in, the atmosphere felt uncomfortable. Gordon seemed relatively intoxicated and got only more drunk as he kept sipping more wine. He said he ordered a bunch of Chinese food and made a little weird comment like, "I know you guys love Chinese food," then laughed. He made little passive-aggressive comments here and there. Eventually the food arrived and he paid, and we offered to help him set up the table, but he almost yelled when he said no. The whole dinner felt tense. Then, as he finished more and more wine, he started acting more differently. He started making rude comments that were less passive and more direct. He said things that made it pretty clear he didn't like that an Asian couple moved into the neighborhood. At first we tried ignoring it, hoping it would stop, but then he got louder and more angry. I mean it, he actually started getting himself angry as he talked about how this town had a history of being white. He started saying things that made both of us feel unsafe, honestly. Then he told us that it was in fact him going into our backyard those nights. He didn't deny it or try to hide it. The climax of the night was when he yelled at us that we were not welcome there and that the neighborhood wasn't for people like us. At that point, we didn't say anything. We just stood up and left. We walked back to our house as fast as we could. We didn't even talk about it until we were inside with the doors locked. We didn't know what to do except go to the other neighbors. So we walked door to door, asking them about Gordon. Some of them were shocked when we told them what happened. Others weren't surprised at all. A few people told us Gordon was a drunk whose wife left him years ago. It didn't make us feel any better because we were living next to him now. We tried to avoid him after that. We didn't look at his house, we didn't go outside unless we had to. But how long could you avoid your next door neighbor? Every night felt tense, like he could be watching us or trespassing again. Then, one night, a brick was thrown through our downstairs window. It shattered glass all over the living room. We both jumped out of bed when we heard it. When I ran downstairs, the brick was lying on the floor. No note attached or anything, just a brick. We knew it was Gordon. There was no one else it could have been, but we had no proof. We filed a police report. The police came to talk to him, but he denied everything. He acted confused and told them he had nothing to do with it. The police couldn't do anything except document the incident. We talked about putting up cameras and staying to fight it out. But honestly, we were too scared, and this was mentally exhausting already. We both felt like something worse would happen if we stayed. Not even 2 months after moving in, we started packing again. We couldn't live next to someone who hated us and had already gone into our yard at night and then thrown a brick at our house. Before we left, we filed another report explaining everything. The police said they would keep an eye on the situation, but we didn't feel protected. We moved out of that house and out of that neighborhood as fast as we could. We left behind the home we thought would be our first chapter in life together. I still think if we stayed there, you'd have eventually heard of my fiancé and I on the news having been murdered by this man. I wish it wasn't illegal to dox people. Boy, would I love to drop his address in this story. All we can do now is move on and upward from here. This story happened a couple of years ago, around late 2021. My name is Noah, and me and my fiancée Gabby, who is now my wife, had moved into a new house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a nice 2-story house, perfect for our future family. The neighbors seemed friendly and welcoming as well. Most notably, the neighbors that lived to the right of us seemed the friendliest. It was a couple in their late 30s, but I wasn't really sure. The husband's name was Daniel, and his wife was named Veronica. They were very friendly and seemed like sweet people. They even baked us a red velvet cake as a little welcoming gift. The cake was really good, and we couldn't thank them enough for it. The first couple of weeks were good in the new neighborhood. It was quiet and peaceful, until we started noticing strange things with our neighbors, Daniel and Veronica. One night, around 11 p.m., I heard shouting coming from outside. I looked out my bedroom window and realized it was coming from their house, like they were arguing. I couldn't see them because the angle of the houses blocked my view. Eventually, I saw Veronica storm out to her car and leave. After that, it was quiet again. I told Gabby about it, and we just chalked it up to them getting into an argument and Veronica leaving to cool off. I was kind of concerned because they seemed like such sweet people, not the type to have heated arguments, but every couple has disagreements. We didn't think too much of it. Later on that same week, Gabby and I were coming back home. When we got out of the car, we heard yelling coming from inside their house again. They had their main door open, but the storm door was closed, so we could hear them arguing clearly. Again, it wasn't our business, so we ignored it. Then one day, I noticed Veronica's car wasn't there for a few days, but I assumed maybe she was on vacation. Daniel was still there because his car stayed parked, and I would see him go out once in a while. But then it became a week, then 2 weeks, and Veronica's car was still gone. My wife noticed too and thought maybe they got divorced or something, which would make sense due to their constant arguing. But the way she left was so sudden. One day her car was there, the next it was gone. And Daniel was acting weird. Every time we saw him, he would try to avoid us. He wouldn't wave like neighbors usually do, and the rare times I talked to him, he would talk fast and try to end the conversation as soon as possible, like he was nervous. Something was definitely up with him. After 3 weeks of Veronica being gone, I decided to go over and ask Daniel how things were. My fiancé argued against it, saying it wasn't our business and to leave it alone. But curiosity got the best of me, and I knew she was curious too, so I rang his doorbell. I knew he was home because his car was there. It took him almost 3 minutes to answer, and when he did, he looked off. He was sweating like he just ran a marathon, and he had this weird forced smile like he was hiding something. I asked him about Veronica and why I haven't seen her or her car in a while. He hesitated and said, she just went to go stay with her mom for a while out of state because she's very sick and she's looking after her. I felt like that was a lie, but I didn't question it. I might have believed him if he wasn't acting so strange. I then asked why he was sweating so much, and he said he was doing workouts upstairs. He was speaking really fast, like he was rushed or nervous, but then something happened that made my heart drop. I heard a voice scream from somewhere inside the house. I wasn't exactly sure where, but I was almost positive it was a woman's voice yelling for help. I asked what that was, and Daniel quickly said, I'm playing a movie upstairs and forgot to pause it. That made no sense since he had just said he was working out upstairs. I just said okay and told him I would catch him later. I went back home and told Gabby everything. She was just as concerned as me and told me to call the cops. I did, and I requested to stay anonymous, even though Daniel would probably know it was me. I told the dispatcher that I heard something in my neighbor's house and wanted them to do a welfare check. Eventually, an officer pulled up. About 10 minutes later, I heard sirens and saw 5 police cars and an ambulance. Me and Gabby rushed outside. Officers were everywhere. Daniel was being taken away in handcuffs while Veronica was being rushed to the ambulance on a stretcher. We later found out Daniel and Veronica had been in an abusive relationship and things had escalated badly. Daniel kept her locked in the basement for weeks. I didn't even know they had a basement. Down there, he would assault her, rape her, abuse her, and do horrible things. He even sold her car to make it look like she wasn't home. When I heard that scream while talking to him, it turned out he stabbed her 5 times because she had made noise when he told her to be quiet while he answered the door. That explained why he was acting so strange. Unfortunately, Veronica didn't survive and passed a couple hours later. As Daniel was being escorted into a police car, he said, "I know it was you who snitched on me, and you'll regret this." I wanted to laugh it off if the situation wasn't so messed up, knowing he would be behind bars for a long time. It's crazy how you never know who people truly are behind closed doors. Daniel seemed like a friendly, normal guy, and so did Veronica. They seemed like a great couple, but obviously they had serious issues hidden underneath. Fast forward a couple nights after the incident, I woke up in the middle of the night. It was dark, and I saw the silhouette of a person. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that it was Daniel. My heart dropped. He said, "I told you you would regret this." He was holding a knife. I tried talking him down, telling him to calm down and just talk, but he didn't respond. I pressed myself against the headboard. Then, out of nowhere, he lunged at me. I screamed, and then I woke up for real. I was breathing heavily, and Gabby was beside me. She asked what was wrong, and I said it was just a bad dream. She went back to sleep, but I couldn't. The fact that I dreamed about my neighbor who murdered his wife breaking into my house to kill me chills me to this day. Most dreams fade, but this one stayed vivid, and the words he said in the dream were the exact same ones he said while being taken away in cuffs. I never told my wife about this dream. I don't know why. I guess because she might think I'm crazy or it would just stress her out. Eventually, after we got married, we moved to another part of town. It's a nice, quiet neighborhood and a great house, but the whole event traumatized us. Knowing we lived next to a murderer still haunts us. My name is Devin, and this happened 2 years ago when I was 24 and living in a duplex in Queens, New York. It was a small, old house that looked divided right down the middle. I rented the left side, and some man rented the right side. I never met him. I never even saw him. The landlord said he kept to himself and worked nights, so it didn't concern me. My bedroom was on the second floor, and the wall of my bedroom was the same wall as the neighbor's bedroom. If I pressed my ear up to the wall, I could hear faint movements on the other side sometimes, but that's to be expected in New York City. The first week that I lived there, nothing strange happened. I worked long hours, came home tired, ate something simple, and went straight to bed. I was just happy to have my own place. And then one night, things began. I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when I heard what sounded like a man talking, but it didn't sound like a normal man's voice. It was high-pitched, like someone trying to talk in a fake voice. It was faint, and it was being spoken from the other room, but the wall was so thin that it felt like the person was standing right next to me. I couldn't understand what he was saying. It was just this weird, high voice mumbling. I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was on the phone, or maybe he was watching something on TV. Eventually, the mumbling stopped and I fell asleep. A few nights later, though, the mumbling came back. But this time it was louder, and this time it was definitely a man talking. I pressed my ear lightly to the wall and listened. It didn't sound like he was on the phone. It sounded like he was talking to himself. I didn't know whether to laugh or be slightly creeped out. To block the noise out, I put the blanket over my head. I had work early the next morning and I needed sleep. I think that was the first night I realized I did not like living there alone. 2 weeks after that, the knocks started. I was lying in bed again, half asleep, when I heard 2 taps on the wall right next to my head. It was so close that I flinched like someone was touching me. I sat up and waited a few moments in silence, and then there were 2 more identical taps on the wall from the other side. I knew for sure that it was not a house settling noise that could just easily be explained away. I rolled away from the wall and sat there shaking. I kept waiting to hear something else, but it went quiet. I wanted to knock back, but I realized that acknowledging it would likely make it worse. The next morning, I told myself it was not a big deal and that I was overreacting. Over the next week, the knocks continued. Sometimes soft, sometimes harder, always at night, and always when I was trying to sleep. One night it went on for so long that I put in headphones and turned on a loud fan. I remember lying awake thinking about how thin the wall was, how close his room was, how close he was. He could literally be lying just 2 feet away from me. It scared me more every night. But still, the knocks could have just been him sitting against the wall and accidentally banging or tapping the wall with something. But then came the night that everything changed. I'll never forget it. I was lying in bed on my side, facing the wall. My eyes were closed, but I was not asleep yet. The room was dark, except for my street lamp shining through the blinds. I heard the knocks again. 3 slow ones. I kept my eyes closed and tried not to react. Then I heard that same high-pitched man's voice come through the wall. It was muffled, but not that muffled. I could hear each word clear enough. He said, "What are you doing in there?" My lungs locked up. I sat straight up in bed, shaking so hard I felt my teeth chattering. This was no longer just potential accidental taps on the wall. He was now acknowledging me directly. He said it straight through the wall. I could just tell he said it like he knew I was right next to him. I grabbed my phone and called my boyfriend. I whispered to him that I was scared out of my mind and told him exactly what happened. He told me he was coming over right away and he would stay the night with me. I stayed sitting up with the lights on until he arrived. The rest of the night, nothing happened. It was almost worse that way. It made me feel crazy, like the neighbor knew my boyfriend was there. For a few days, things were quiet. I started thinking maybe it was just some weird coincidence that the neighbor was doing something and I misheard. But then a few nights later, something happened that made me leave the house running. I still have bad dreams about it. I was asleep this time, fully asleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I woke up fast. Something snapped me awake. I sat up slightly, and then it started. The knocks on the wall, like someone drumming their fingers right beside my head. I screamed back without thinking. I shouted for whoever it was to leave me alone. I was shaking and breathing hard. I think mustering up the courage to finally yell back spiked my adrenaline. I don't know exactly what I expected next, but I will tell you, what did happen next I never expected in a million years. There was a voice. It came from inside my room. A voice in the dark said, "Go to sleep." It was not the voice from the wall. It was deeper and closer, right there in my room. I launched off my bed screaming. For some reason, the brief moments of my running through the hallway and down the stairs was a blur, because I really just remember getting outside and running into the street screaming for help over and over. I must have looked insane. I ran barefoot onto the sidewalk. I kept looking behind me, expecting someone to be chasing me. I didn't stop screaming until a man 2 houses down came outside and stared at me like he didn't know what to do. I begged him to let me use his phone to call my boyfriend, but he said by the sound of it I needed to call the police. So I called the police instead. I waited by that man's sidewalk shaking and crying until the police arrived. When they showed up, I told them everything that happened. They asked me if I was sure that someone was in the house, and I said yes, 100% yes. They drove me back to my duplex, and 2 officers went inside. My front door was still wide open like I left it. They said there were no signs of forced entry. They asked me if I remembered unlocking the door as I ran out. I had no memory of touching the lock. I told them I didn't think I unlocked it, but I was so panicked that maybe I did. I couldn't be sure. They checked every room, every closet, under the bed, everywhere. No one was in the house. They knocked on the neighbor's door too, but he wouldn't open up. It looked like he wasn't home at all. Eventually, my boyfriend showed up and took me back to his place. I was still shaking hours later. I don't remember sleeping again the rest of the night. In the morning, I called my landlord and told him everything. I told him I needed to know who the neighbor was and if he had any history of problems or strange behavior. I also told him I wanted to break the lease immediately. At first, he pushed back. He said he needed notice and paperwork. I told him I would not step foot in that duplex alone again, and he needed to help me. It took a whole day of phone calls before he said he would let me break the lease. My boyfriend came with me every single time I went back to the duplex to move my stuff. I refused to go alone. During those days, we tried knocking on the neighbor's door multiple times, but he never answered. It was like no one lived there. But there were signs that someone did, like packages at the door and a car in the driveway, but no human response. I ended up moving back in with my parents for a while until I found a new place. I still don't know if that neighbor was actually in my room that night, or if someone got in without the police noticing, or if it was just all in my head from the stress. But that one's the least likely explanation because it's pretty clear what's real and what's in your head. My landlord told me later that the neighboring tenant eventually moved out too without saying a word. I don't know what really happened in that duplex.
There was this time long ago that I was in charge of watching my cousin and his 4 friends while they slept over. My uncle was paying me $100 to watch them for the night. All I did was play video games with a bunch of 10-year-olds for most of the night. I thought it would be the easiest $100 I ever made, but things took a huge turn for the worse when I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. We were in the basement still playing video games. 2 of the kids also heard the sounds. I counted 5 kids sitting on the couches, and neither my aunt or uncle were supposed to be home that night. I swallowed my gum when I realized the basement door was wide open. I told them to stay there while I ran upstairs to shut the door. The door didn't have a lock from the inside, only the outside. I called to the kids to hide in the workout room. I shut the TV and all the lights and then followed the kids into the workout room. We listened in the dark as the footsteps approached the basement door, and then the horrible sound of the basement door opening, followed by heavy steps stomping down each stair one by one. One of my cousin's friends were crying. I had to tell them to shut the hell up. I leaned against the door with a chair along with a bunch of barbell weights wedged against it. I listened as the door to the boiler room was opened and a few moments later closed. Screams of children filled the room as the doorknob to the workout room began to turn. I pushed the door with all my might to keep it shut. Whoever was on the other side quickly gave up as we heard rushed footsteps going up the stairs. I heard the footsteps right above our heads moving in the direction of the front door. This was before everybody had cell phones, so calling somebody first wasn't an option. I scanned the whole house, finding that the front door had been left open and all the bedrooms upstairs had been trashed. Nobody was in the house, so I called the kids up. A few things had been stolen, but as long as nobody was hurt, we were all happy. It was during a blizzard in Valley Stream. I was getting paid $250 to watch some couple's kid while they went away for the weekend. His name was Matthew. This took place on the first night, which was a Friday night. Matthew was already supposedly asleep, while I was in the living room watching a movie. I got a knock at the door, and looked at the clock. It was close to midnight. There was no way I was opening it. Not even 10 seconds later,
Open the fucking door! Open the door! Open the door!
I heard the sound of 2 or 3 men angrily banging on the door, telling me to open up. I felt like my heart was about to stop. I took a peek through the blinds, and there was somebody standing right on the other side of the window. I fell back in fear, and after managing to get back on my feet, I ran to the kitchen phone first thing to call the police. They said because of the weather, it could take a while for an officer to get here. I was told to take the child and hide somewhere until an officer arrived. They wanted to keep me on the line, but I wasn't thinking clearly in the heat of the moment and hung up. However, it wasn't until I ran through the living room that I realized the banging had stopped. I took a second peek through the living room window. Nobody was there now. I heard the sound of glass shattering from a few rooms over. My knees started to feel weak as I realized they had just broken the window and were about to climb into the house. I had to run and get Matthew. I couldn't just leave without him. Of course, when I got upstairs, there was no time left to run back downstairs, as I already heard footsteps and laughter coming from downstairs. I covered Matthew's mouth with my hand as I ran with him into his toy closet. A few minutes dragged on to what felt like half an hour as we sat there in the dark closet. Matthew began to squeal as footsteps on the carpet reached the outside of his bedroom door. There was more than one person. They came inside. There weren't many places to hide in this room. I was actually reflecting on my whole life, so sure I was gonna die. We heard the sound of a police siren outside, even from in the closet, and then I heard one of the men in the room mutter, "Aw, shit." I opened the door back up as I heard at least 3 pairs of footsteps hurriedly rushing down the stairs. They didn't get far, as the police later found their footprints in the backyard, leading to our shed. There were 5 men in total, and they were all arrested. I was 15 years old, still babysitting since I couldn't get a real job. This was by far the most horrifying experience of my life. Me and this kid I was babysitting, his name was Mike, were taking a walk with his dog through the woods in his backyard. His dog stopped, ears pointed up straight, and paw in the air. The dog started barking, pulling, and going crazy. He noticed something, and we were nervous that it was a black bear, so I told Mike to turn around and walk back to the house. I struggled to pull the dog in the other direction, and then I noticed what he was barking at. Beyond a big tree was some guy just standing there, staring up at me. I yelled out, asking to him if he needed something, and with that, he turned around and walked off. I was genuinely freaked the fuck out. The dog calmed down at this point, so walking back was easier for a few minutes, until yet again, the dog started freaking out about something behind us. I couldn't see what it was, but I was worried it was the same guy as before, and that he might have been following me. I was tempted to unleash the dog on this guy, but that seemed like a bad idea. I didn't look back for the rest of the way back to the house, but the dog continued to bark and pull. I did the best I could to run, or at least walk fast. I made sure for a good half hour that we weren't followed to the house, checking every window and door routinely. I thought it was safe to eventually play Mario Kart with Mike and forget about what happened, but my worst fear came true, when right outside the window in the patio, I heard the sound of one of the toy buckets falling over. Turning on the patio light, I could see that a green bucket full of beach toys and balls had been knocked over. There was no way some small animal could do that. The dog was once again going crazy, barking at something. I told Mike to get me his dad's hunting rifle. Maybe that was dumb to have an 8-year-old get a gun for me, but I didn't have time to think rationally. There continued to be strange noises coming from all around the outside of the house. There was some taps on the windows, chimes being pushed, things falling over, but I eventually caught a glimpse of him through one of the windows. He was walking past until he noticed me and stopped. I lifted the gun up to show him that we were armed. He didn't run away right away though. He stood there crouched like some kind of creature, staring right into my soul. He finally walked back into the woods. I didn't sleep much that night, jumping at every small cracking noise. A week later, I got a call from Mike's parents. They told me a creepy-looking man had been stalking their house from the woods. They asked me to describe what the man that I saw looked like again. I couldn't give a good description, as I didn't see much of his face, but I assured them it was the same man. They practically begged me to babysit on a few occasions after this, but I always respectfully declined. That was a while ago, and I have no idea what's become of this family today, and what's become of the man stalking their house. I would frequently babysit back between the ages of 15 and 18. I lived close to a relatively wealthy area where people were more generous in terms of pay. There was never a shortage of need for babysitters either, so I made a decent amount of money. I've definitely had to take care of some stranger kids, but this one takes the prize. Right from the moment I met Michael, he seemed really quiet and weird. He was 12 years old too, which some might argue is more than old enough to be home alone, but maybe not overnight. They needed me to stay overnight. His parents told me he could be a bit strange sometimes and may need some extra attention. I didn't really need to do much though. In the room that I would be sleeping in was a huge toy closet, big enough to fit a big Lego play table with a bunch of Legos and other toys sitting on top of it. Michael was up there for most of his time building with Legos and other toys. I didn't really spy on him too much, I just let him do his own thing. But I heard him constantly talking in there, as if someone were with him, not play talking. I could only assume he had some kind of problems, and that's what his parents were hinting at. He came down eventually to eat some of the leftovers in the fridge, but then went right back up to his closet. It wasn't until I finally told him it was time to go to sleep that he left the closet. I just wanted to go to sleep myself. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to sounds coming from the closet, Sounds of toys, like Legos. I called out to Michael to go to sleep. The sound stopped. The light wasn't on in the closet, so I was confused as to how the hell he could be playing in the dark. I went over to open the closet and turn the light on. Michael didn't seem to be in there. I dismissed the noises. I wasn't a paranoid person. I fell back asleep. I'd say an hour later, I woke up to partial brightness in the room. The closet light was on, but the door was shut. I called Michael's name again. I was pissed now. I saw the outlines of feet at the bottom of the closet door, and then heard a little giggle as if Michael were messing with me. I knew he was in there now. I marched over and threw open the door, and literally fell back in horror when nobody at all was in there. Where the two outlines of feet were, there was nothing now. I felt a pain in my chest from the fear. I ran to Michael's room to find him asleep in his bed. I locked his door and laid down on his floor. Just being next to another person made me feel a little safer. I fell asleep on the floor, and when the parents returned the next day, I decided to keep quiet about what I witnessed. I say what I witnessed because I know what happened. I got paid and left, and never had to worry about it again. Of course, it still sends chills up my spine thinking about it, and I still have no idea what to believe.
It was a Friday or a Saturday night. I was pre-gaming with some friends at my apartment before going out to a bar in town. One of my friends called the Uber, and we were all pretty drunk, laughing and being loud with typical drunken banter. We got to the bar, and no line that night, surprisingly. At some point in the night, I asked for a girl's number who I'd been talking to. When I went into my pocket to get my phone, I realized I didn't have it on me. I checked all my pockets and confirmed this. I tried retracing my steps in the bar, and asked each bartender if someone turned in a phone. I didn't remember even using my phone the whole time I'd been out, though. I stepped outside the bar with one of my friends to use his phone to call mine. Someone picked up on the other end. I heard the fiddling of the phone, but they didn't say anything. I said, "Hi, where'd you find this phone?" Just breathing on the other end. I asked them if they were at the bar, but they hung up on me. I looked at my friend and tried calling again. Went straight to voicemail, though. I tried using Find My iPhone, but apparently I had that feature switched off for some reason. This was a pretty sobering experience. There was no way I could have fun knowing my phone was stolen. My friends told me just worry about it tomorrow, go to the police station and get their help in tracking it. I went home early that night. I put a couple slices of bread in the toaster before bed, and found my phone on the kitchen counter. It didn't make sense. I signed into it and checked my recent calls, and indeed, someone accepted the call, and it lasted for 25 seconds. Someone had been in my apartment to accept the call, that much was clear. I flipped the place upside down looking, screaming for whoever it was to come out from where they were hiding. Of course, this had a lot to do with the liquid confidence from drinking so much that night. I finally called the cops, but considering there was no real proof of any forced entry, and places to hide are basically non-existent in this apartment, they couldn't do anything besides a police report. Nothing seemed to be missing from my apartment, but going to sleep that night, knowing someone had been in my apartment, or even worse, might possibly have still been in there with me, was probably the most uncomfortable night of my life. I was 17 years old, and this happened on a late summer night. My dad and little brother had gone to a Boy Scout campout. My dad was one of the scoutmasters. I was home alone with my mom for the weekend. She was already in bed at this point. It was about 2 in the morning, and I was just finishing up my late night gaming. I had to go to the bathroom one more time before going to sleep, though. While sitting on the toilet playing games on my phone, I heard the faintest little tap on the bathroom door. "Mom, was that you?" "Mom," I yelled. It wasn't windy or anything. There didn't seem to be any logical way to dismiss it. I slowly and nervously opened the door, but there was nobody there. However, my bedroom door was now shut. I was certain I hadn't shut it. I went over to my mom's room and told her that I thought somebody was in my room. She didn't take me seriously and told me that she didn't know what to tell me. I tried to convince myself that maybe I did shut my door. I opened my door feeling extremely freaked out, and when I snuck a peek into the room, I felt like my heart exploded inside of my chest. I could see a hand sticking out from behind the dresser in the corner of my room. Somebody was hiding there. I ran to my mom's room and locked the door behind me. After quietly freaking out, telling her there's a man in the house, she finally believed me and went straight to my phone to call the cops. I put my ear up against the door to try and hear anything going on outside. I eventually heard the man's footsteps come out from my room and slowly come closer to my mom's room until making it right outside the door, then stopping. I could see the outlines of his shoes through the bottom crack of the door. He tried the doorknob, but thankfully it had a lock. It seemed the lock was enough to persuade him to give up, because I heard him stomp down the stairs and out the front door. I hurried to the window to see which way the man was heading, but he was already gone. When I was younger, 10 years old at the time, my mom had just started letting me stay home alone. We had been watching my mom's friend's dog while they were on vacation. My mom worked weeknights, so she told me that they would come around back since the dog's cage was right next to the back door, and that I would have to let them in. I sat in the den by the back door, with the dog by my side while I watched TV. He then started to growl and bark, while looking out the window to the dark. I tried to see what he was barking at, but it was too dark. Of course, I assumed it was my mom's friend coming to pick up the dog. I went over to the door with the dog following me and turned on the patio light. I couldn't see anyone out there at first, but the dog was still barking. I made sure to peek at every corner of the yard, but then I saw someone at the garden by our shed. It looked like my mom's friend. They seemed to be bending over, picking something up. I assumed she was admiring my mom's garden or something logical. I then received a disturbing phone call. I prioritized answering the phone, as my mom was strict about me always answering the phone when I was home alone. I left the dog to continue barking by the door as I picked up the phone, hoping it was my mom. And it was. She told me that her friend wasn't going to pick up the dog that night, as they wouldn't be getting home until past midnight. I began to stutter as the pure horror prohibited me from speaking coherently. I managed to finally blurt out that someone was in our yard, and my mom started screaming like a lunatic. She told me to get up to my room, lock the door, and hide under the bed while my mom called the cops. I obeyed and laid there in silence for a good 10 minutes, until I got a knock at the door. I sprang up and out of the room, making it halfway down the stairs, when I saw a face looking in through the window of our front door. This face, a guy, staring right at me. A face so unsettling that it disturbs me thinking of it today. I screamed at the guy that the police were on their way, but he didn't move. He insisted on just staring at me like a statue. I ran all the way back upstairs, tripping twice, and back to my room. I waited another few minutes before another knock came at the door, followed by a muffled shouting noise. It was the police this time. They scanned the whole premises, but the guy was gone. They took me into custody until my mom arrived at the station. After that incident, she started having a babysitter watch me again, all the way until I was 12. A long time ago, my girlfriend and I were looking for a private place to be alone together since our parents were always home. There was a vacant house on the corner of our block that hadn't been owned for years. The back door was always left unlocked. I would know because my friends and I had been in there before. We We went in through the back, but before we could even get upstairs, there was a knock at the front door. We looked at each other with worry. What if someone had caught us sneaking in? She peeked out the window, but there was no one on the stoop. She made sure that the door was locked before turning back to me. I assured her it was just some kids playing ding-dong ditch. We made it only halfway up the stairs before the frantic knocking on the door came back. She checked the window again. The porch was still empty. She opened the door this time and still couldn't see anyone. I wanted to look tough to impress her, so I stepped outside and yelled at the pranksters to try it again. I shut the door and waited behind it, hands on the doorknob, ready to throw the door open. I just waited there for at least a minute, and I was about to just forget about it when I heard the blood-curdling scream of my girlfriend. I turned to see what she was screaming at, and I screamed as well. Just barely in the dark, we could see the silhouette of a huge humanoid figure very slowly making its way down the stairs. It was moving in a hovering-like motion. We ran past it just in arm's reach and left the house the way we came. We ran all the way back to my house, both of us out of breath. We know it couldn't have been an old person. They had to be at least 7 feet tall. Nobody was supposed to be living in that house, though. I even asked a friend living across the street from the house, and he said it had been vacant for years. The ghostly way the figure moved made it all the more disturbing. We both agreed to keep quiet about this story, but I still occasionally have a nightmare or bad thoughts about that night. During hunting season, at least once a year, I try to travel up to Maine and rent an Airbnb to go hunting. I never bought my own place because I can't really afford it just for a single trip every year, so doing a weekend rental makes more sense for me. Plus, I'm not exactly an expert. I'm still trying to get more experience. Some years I'd go with my uncle, but in recent years he hasn't been in the best shape health-wise and he's not really up to it anymore, so I've been going alone more recently. Last year, which was 2022 at the time I'm writing this, was the last season that I went hunting. It was November. The Airbnb I rented was near a national park. I arrived late on a Friday because I had to come home from work, get ready, then head out on the road trip. When I pulled up into the long stretch of private dirt road to get to the cabin-type Airbnb, it was pitch black outside, and it was dead silent too. This time of year there's obviously no bugs or crickets left, so the nights are dead silent and dark up there, especially if the place you're staying is secluded like this one. I pulled up as close as I could to the cabin, and the owner told me the key would be hidden under the mat. Sure enough, it was there. I brought my 2 bags inside the cabin and unpacked my things onto the bed in the 1 bedroom. It was a very cozy cabin, and the owner already had the heat turned up for me, which was nice. Maine gets pretty cold up there in November. There was cable and Wi-Fi in this Airbnb, so I set an alarm to get an early start at dawn, which in my opinion is the best time to find deer or even moose if you're lucky. The next morning, I was up as soon as my alarm went off, and I was out in the woods in less than half an hour. Since this was foreign territory to me, I posted up behind a blowdown I found, some knocked over trees. Usually this would now be a waiting game, but I heard a man's voice call from behind me. I had a mini heart attack and turned around to see some man with gray hair, but who looked like he was only 50. He was approaching me slowly. He said slowly in a very angry sounding voice, "What the hell are you doing here?" I responded, "Excuse me?" He said, "Hunting is restricted here." I actually was unaware of this, and when I explained this to him, he said, "I watched you ride up here. You best leave the way you came." This scared me. I said, "What do you mean you watched me ride up here?" He told me he always sees people riding up to that cabin, always out-of-town folk who come up here for the wrong reasons. I apologized to him and told him I'd leave. I grabbed my things and started walking back the way I came, and when I looked behind me, the man was gone, out of sight. I walked back to the cabin, then took my car and drove to a different park that, according to some website, allowed hunting. I posted up there and had a failure of the first half of the day. Around midday, I went back to the cabin to just regroup and have a meal. But when I got back to the cabin, I found that the door was unlocked. I could have sworn I locked it before. When I got inside, I was almost positive certain things had been moved around and the zipper to my bag was unzipped. I couldn't remember if I left it zipped up or not, but it was typical for me to always keep my bag zipped up. I just checked every room quick before settling down. I was way too hungry to just prepare a light meal, so I drove to the little village nearby and picked up some Chinese takeout. Then I drove right back to the cabin. I was planning on heading back out to the park at dusk. When I got back to the cabin, I just ate my food and went straight to take a nap. After my nap, I headed back out to the park. I spent about an hour walking maybe a quarter mile very slowly, and I wasn't finding anything. My uncle always told me you could find a deer or moose in 10 minutes or 10 days. It just depends on how many are present and being in the right place at the right time. Sadly, luck was not on my side this day, and so when it was starting to get dark, I packed up and started heading back to my truck. It was just a short drive back to the cabin. I cooked the pasta and meatballs I brought with me for dinner as I had the TV on in the background. Then I laid down on the little love seat couch as I ate and watched some old black and white movie. While sitting there, I thought back to earlier how the door was unlocked and things appeared to have been moved. Only I didn't notice anything missing. I wondered if it was just in my head or not. Not long after this, I brushed my teeth and shifted to the bedroom where I began to watch another movie in there, planning on falling asleep to it. I was starting to drift into that half-sleep state, where what was going on in the movie was actually starting to blend into this half-awake dream I was kind of having, until I heard the distinct sound of a door clicking open that snapped me out of my half-sleep. I groggily looked up and noticed the closet door in the room was now cracked open. This immediately woke me up completely. Now, the door being unlocked and belongings potentially being moved did not seem like a coincidence. I waited a moment, then got out of bed, went to my hunting pack, and grabbed my CZ75. I went back to the bedroom, turned on the light, and pointed my gun at the closet door. I yelled, "Come out now or I'll shoot." A big part of me still didn't believe there could actually be a person in there, and I thought that I was just being overly cautious. But when the door actually pushed open, I was in pure shock. That older man from earlier in the day stepped out, and his unhappy-looking face switched to a gross smile, missing a front tooth. He said, "You got me." I said don't move as I went to grab my cell phone and call 911. Thank God I had service here. The sheriff's department was on their way, and I let them know I was armed and had the intruder at gunpoint. It was an excruciatingly long wait before the sheriff's deputies arrived. During that time, the man was telling me how he's sick of people like me having no respect for the parks up here. I had no idea what he meant, but I wasn't entertaining him. I kept telling him to shut up. When deputies got there, it was an obvious arrest for breaking and entering and possibly robbery, though I don't think he ever actually stole anything from me. The man claimed the door was simply unlocked, though I don't know if that was true or if he had somehow picked the lock or even climbed through a window. The Airbnb host said that there were no other hidden keys and that I definitely left the door unlocked. He seemed more concerned about whether anything of his was stolen and putting blame on me as opposed to asking me if I was okay and apologizing for the experience. He said he had no idea who the man could have been, even after getting his name. I still don't think I left the door unlocked, but thank God I was on a hunting trip and had my firearms with me to quickly neutralize the threat. I was 14 when this story took place. It was my first year hunting deer with my family. To be specific, my father, my cousin, and myself. To paint a picture, my blind was 2 miles south of my father's, with his stand being 9 miles southwest to my camp. We drove a four-wheeler about 100 yards away from his stand, which left me with a while to walk before I even got to mine. I live in northern Michigan, and during the winter it gets dark quickly and early. It was around 4 p.m. when I started to get cold and decided to close up my tent. I was hunting with a .243 rifle that had a pink camo cover on it with a strap around so I could hang it off my back. I closed up my blind zippers and put my garbage away in a bucket I had. As I was throwing away my trash, I heard a couple leaves crumble, so I immediately turned my head up to see if it was a deer. After about a minute, I brushed it off as a squirrel or a bird. Disappointed, I closed my blind and headed to my father's. As I was taking my first steps out of my blind, I could see a fresh pathway brush through the leaves. It was a wide path, not from a small animal or even a deer. I immediately started thinking a bear or a wolf, so I started speed walking to where my dad was. I started to panic as it started to get even darker and I was still roughly a mile away. I was just walking as I was stopped in my tracks by one of the most haunting and horrifying noises I'd ever heard. The best way to describe it was a bear/man that was being murdered. It sounded roughly 150 yards back as I started to run. Running with boots and thick hunting gear was hard with 20 pounds on my back, but fear pushed me through and I didn't stop. Around 25 seconds later, I was still running when I heard it again. This time it was louder and closer. At this point, it was completely dark out, with the moon being the only source of light. I turned around with my headlight, and what I saw is still the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. Around 50 yards away, I saw a black figure in the dark, illuminated by the moonlight behind it. It was around 10 feet tall and skinny. Without thinking twice, I started running while trying to get my gun off my back. I didn't know where I was running, but I just ran. I ended up on a road that I recognized as Rabbit Road, the road that connects my camp with the entrance to the hunting area. I ran on the road until I got to my camp. By the time I got into sight of my cabin, I turned around again and saw it again, this time further away. It was still standing up, and I can only describe it as a tall, black, skinny figure. It had long arms and long legs. As I got on my cabin steps, I threw up from exhaustion and continued to vomit for about a minute as I later then passed out. I woke up to the sound of my dad's four-wheeler turning into the cabin driveway. I started crying as I ran up to him, hugging him. I quickly told him the story of what happened and how I ran back without stopping. He didn't believe me at first, but as we got settled inside, his face started to change as he saw the desperation in my eyes. I didn't sleep that night, or for weeks after. People have told me it was most likely a bear or I was just seeing things, but I know what I saw. I'm older now, and I only hunt with someone with me. I also hunt with a bigger gun because it gives me reassurance that I could shoot something larger. As I'm writing this was the most scary experience of my life. It was a Friday evening and I was getting home from school. I was 13 years old and was really excited to go hunting. I love hunting, especially the ranch we go to in Alice, Texas. I've been going there since I was 4, and I have so many memories of the place. It was my grandpa, my dad, and I going. There were going to be a few other people, like the ranch owner's family. We were packed up and ready to go. It was deer season, my favorite season. Just the feeling of seeing a big deer right in front of your eyes is a wonderful feeling, and of course shooting it. People say that it's wrong to kill animals, but I disagree if you're actually eating it. We got to the ranch and it was 10 p.m., so it was pretty dark out there. The ranch is 300 acres, I believe, and the campsite is an old little shack, probably the size of a normal bedroom. There is electricity there, but it's not a huge cabin where most hunters sleep in. However, there are little beds there, but one time my dad found a huge snake shed in one of the beds when I was little, so from then on we sleep in a tent. The camp is surrounded by woods, with a little field up ahead, probably a little less than the size of a football field. We use that field for dove hunting. Anyhow, we unloaded and chatted for a while around the campfire, telling jokes and whatnot, when we heard this scream. It was the most disturbing thing I'd ever heard. It sounded like a human hybrid or something. The scream sounded not too far away. All of us jumped from our seats and looked at each other. Every man there was freaked out. I could see it in their eyes. The ranch owner was the first one to say, "What the fuck was that?" He then told us and one of his family members to go check it out. He's a pretty old guy in his 70s, so that's why we went to go check it out. We took my grandpa's ATV and did a quick search around the perimeter, only to find nothing. I was still traumatized, and I was even scared to go in the blind by myself. As all hunters know, we have to wake up before dawn and get up into the blind to be unseen by the deer. I went to sleep in the tent with a gun right beside me. I woke up to the alarm and got ready. I was scared of being left alone in the dark, even though it was only an hour or two before dawn breaks. I was still petrified by the scream, and it still echoed in my mind today. My grandpa dropped me off at the blind with his ATV and left. My dad was already in his position. My grandpa's not a soft grandpa. He expects you to know it and do it. Him being him, he just left me in the dark, expecting me to find my way up to the blind myself. So I began climbing up the ladder and began navigating with just my hands. I got into the blind and waited for the sun to peek out. 20 minutes passed and it was still dark out when I noticed something in the middle of the trail. I couldn't see well, so I thought it was the right time to use a night vision sight that my uncle had given me. I was excited, expecting a big deer, but when I put my eye into the sight, what I saw still haunts me today. I don't care if you believe me or not, but I was expecting a deer, only to find a person walking towards the woods. It was distorted looking, but had the same outline of a person. I don't know how it spotted me, but I saw it turn and face towards me. Now the night vision is not super clear, so I couldn't see its face, but I could see it was looking straight at me. Then, what I heard next will stick with me for the rest of my life. It gave out the same exact blood-curdling scream as the night before, only louder. At that moment, I cannot describe the fear I felt. The word fear is not enough to describe how I felt. I managed to break free from whatever shock I was in, and managed to grab the .22 and started to fire the entire clip into the path it was standing in. I was still frightened, so I got my rifle and fired all the rounds into the path. When I looked back into the night vision, it was gone. I started to get texts and calls like crazy, mostly from my dad. I told him what happened, and he had heard it too, and so did my grandpa. We still go there to hunt, but it has not been the same peaceful hunt. Now when I hunt, I go with my dad, because I'm scared that thing might come back. I don't know what that thing was, but whatever it was, it survived 25 rounds from a .22 and 4 rounds from a .243. Because when we went to go check, there were no signs of blood or anything, not even footprints. I know it was still dark when I fired all those rounds, but I know for sure at least one of them had to hit whatever that thing was. It was the fall of 1986. I was 23 years old. I'd never really been scared in the woods before, honestly. I always felt like the wilderness was my safe place, somewhere I could go and relax and get away from the stresses of life. I've never seen a Bigfoot or skinwalker or any kind of boogeyman in the woods. As a lineman for a small town in West Kentucky, I have seen crazy. Being a small muni, we all had to wear a lot of hats, including utility disconnects. It wasn't fun, but it was part of the job, and there was a lot of crazy, but never in the woods. My only real hobbies were hunting and fishing. Back then, it was easy to find a really good place to hunt just by stopping and asking the landowner for permission. Most were eager to have the deer population thinned out, as they were really destructive, eating young soybean crops. And this was coal country, and back in the 50s there was a lot of strip mining that left a lot of land unusable for building and farming, so much of it was open for hunting. It was October 1986. Daylight savings time hadn't happened yet, and it was still daylight till just after 7 p.m. I left work at 4 and ran home to change into my camo. It was bow season in Kentucky, my favorite season. I was gonna hunt in an area that was special to me. It was in an area we'll call Coon Ridge. This was a very remote area with broken farmland and wooded areas. After parking, I decided not to unload my three-wheeler and just walk the 3/4 of a mile to where I was going to hunt. I was using a Summit climbing stand, so I had to carry my stand and my bow, as well as my fanny pack with my knife and flashlight. I had to walk halfway around the cornfield. The corn had not been cut yet, so I stayed in the lane left by the farmers so that they could get their equipment to the upper end of the field. The field was rectangular, and the upper end was a much higher elevation than the bottom, where I had to cross a creek with shin-deep water to enter the field. At the top of the field, the right-hand corner was where I was going to enter the woods. It was the highest point of the field. I had to pick my way through a thick blackberry thicket, but managed to find a game trail that led me through, and it finally opened into a hillside with large trees. After finding a tree suitable for my climbing stand, getting set up, and a little climb, I was ready to hunt. I love to watch nature. The deer hunting was just an excuse to be in the woods. As a lineman, I had no fear of climbing high, so I would get as high as I could. This time I was up around 20 feet before the canopy started blocking my view. It was around 5:30 when I was settled in my stand and had an arrow nocked. I regularly stayed in my permanent stands late as not to spook deer close by. I had added reflective tape along the trail to mark the way out. This made it easier to find my permanent stands at night. But this day, I was in my climbing stand in an area I hadn't been in that night. I was about to start down when I heard something walking, so I waited. It sounded like a deer in the thicket, but I never really could get a look at it. It was 8 o'clock and close to a full moon that night, so from my high vantage point, I could see pretty good in the woods, and I felt like I could still shoot up to 15 yards, but it was after shooting hours, so I started down. As I did, I could hear the loud crashing of a deer that must have spotted me moving like a sloth down the tree. On the ground, I quickly secured my stand and bow and looked in the direction of the way I came in. I turned on my flashlight. Now the woods look different at night in the dark, and downright foreign when you turn on your flashlight. It's not bad in a mature woods with no undergrowth, but I was walking into a thicket. I walked along the edge of the thicket for a while, trying to find the trail I came in on, but no luck. It was almost 9 o'clock now, and I was ready to get out, so I just started picking my way through the thicket, keeping the moon on my right shoulder, and finally I came out into the field about 25 yards from where I went in. As I stood there picking the thorns out of my hands and legs, thinking this adventure was over, I surveyed the lane around the field, and in the light of the pale moon, I saw it. Now when I walked in, I came up the left side of the field around 200 yards to the end, turned right, and walked another 100 yards. And where I was, it was higher on the ground, and I could see around the field where I came in. When I walked in, there was nothing in the trail. I hadn't heard any equipment or ATVs, so I was shocked to see something in the trail. And no small something either. It looked 6 feet wide and 6 feet tall. Just standing there about halfway up the field trail. It was the only way out, so I never hesitated. I started walking back to the trail, turned toward whatever it was standing there, hoping it was just a strange shadow, but it wasn't. I grabbed an arrow from the quiver, remembering my knife was in my three-wheeler. I walked fast and never broke stride. 100 yards away, and it didn't move or make a sound. I walked loudly straight towards it for 200 yards. All the while thinking it's really there, in my trail, blocking my only way out. As I got closer, I could make out what it was. It was 2 people standing side by side, and this unnerved me even more. It was 9:15, 40 degrees out here. Nobody should be here. I kept walking, now 20 yards away, and I see that it's a guy and girl, maybe 20 years old. 10 yards away, I'm walking towards them, but no sounds from them. They just stood there. When I got to them, I half expected them to jump me, but they never moved. I said, "Kinda cold out here, ain't it?" No sound. They still never moved. I kept walking. I turned to keep an eye on them. I was thinking, okay, this is it. But they never turned around, never even moved their heads. I crossed the creek, and within another 100 yards, I made it back to my truck. I was even more uneasy approaching my truck. It was just so quiet. All I could think of was someone waiting to ambush me, so I kinda eased up on it very quietly and watched it for maybe 3 minutes before approaching it. It seemed fine, so I headed to my truck. As I left, I tried to figure out how they got here, because I never saw another vehicle. I tried to just put it behind me, but the next day at work, during lunch, I was gonna run and get some food, when I noticed all 4 of my tires on my truck were low, and after inspecting them, they all had around 10 to 15 roofing nails in them. I had to put tubes in them to get home. Something odd was going on in those woods. Somebody most certainly did this to my tires while I was parked in them. After this, it always felt like someone was watching me when I was hunting in that area. That's why I stopped going alone, and I never parked off the main gravel road again. I never found out who those 2 young people were, or who punctured my tires. I was taking a road trip in my Mustang from Texas to Arizona to visit my brothers. I usually keep emergency supplies in the trunk, such as water and tools. I was taking, I guess, what you would call a scenic back route, because I liked flying at high speeds with the top down without worry of other cars or police. This was one of those completely deserted seeming roads with 1 lane on either side and nothing but desert sand, cacti, and shrubs as far as the eye can see. I was flying down this road when the car started to emit these concerning popping noises from under the hood, and the car started to jolt or jump slightly. I put a heavy foot on the brakes to bring the car from a speeding 90 miles per hour to a less than gradual halt. I got out from the car, popping the hood, pretending as if I'd even know what to expect or how I'd go about fixing it. There was no smoke, nothing like that, but I didn't have a clue what could be the problem. I got back in my car to try and start it, and as I feared, the damn thing wouldn't even start back up now. The car was an '01 Ford Mustang, so yeah, it was an old car with its share of problems. Naturally, I tried to call my roadside service company, but bad became worse, realizing I didn't have any service this far out in the desert. I was more or less stranded. I hadn't seen a single other car pass me that whole hour I was driving on that road, and I was scared to think how long it would take for someone to pass. I waited on the side of the road, sitting on my car's trunk for literally hours, sweating my ass off. My spirits rose when I saw the shine of a car reflecting the sunlight speeding down the road in the horizon. I hopped off my trunk and started walking and waving my arms out for help, but the car didn't stop. It zoomed past me. Pure evil. I didn't know how somebody could leave another human being stranded like that. Nightfall came and the hunger was setting in. No cars had passed since the first, and I was trying to fill my stomach with the water bottles I had in my trunk. Eventually, I saw headlights approaching. I had my car's hazards on, but I also waved my arms once more. The truck pulled to the side, and a fairly large man stepped out. I told him my car broke down and asked if he knew anything about cars, but he didn't immediately seem interested in my car. He more so seemed interested in asking me if I was alone, where I was going, and why I didn't just call for help. Then he asked me if anyone knew I was here. These questions were certainly making me uncomfortable. He finally offered me a ride, though if he was trying to make a point of making me uncomfortable, he accomplished that. I stepped up into his pickup truck, and off we started driving. He said it would be a long while before either of us would have phone service. He started asking me more questions, like why I would decide to take a back route like this. Minutes in, the truck started to slow down, and I heard him mutter, "Ah, shit." He pulled onto the sand on the side of the road, looked at me, and said the piece of crap broke down. This couldn't be happening. I looked back at the man and realized he was still looking at me. Like 5 seconds went by and he was just still staring at me. He finally asked me to go lift up the hood once he would crank the latch. I can only describe this whole situation so well, but through everything up until this point, I was insanely suspicious. I went in front of his truck with a bit of distance between the front and I, and waited to hear a click, meaning the truck's hood was unlatched. In my head, I was picturing him trying to run me over, and that's exactly what happened. As I took one step towards the truck to try and open the hood, I heard the roar of the engine as the man was on the gas. I dove for my life. If I reacted half a second later, I'd have lost my legs or instantly been killed. I took off running into the pitch black night, looking back to see the taillights still there. And then this. Gunshots. Surely gunshots aimed at me. That man was trying to kill me. It was too dark out there for him to possibly shoot me dead without some kind of luck, but I thought I was going to die at any moment. I ran as far as I could, then dove and made myself as low to the ground as possible. I heard a truck speeding off in the distance, so I turned and saw the taillights of the truck slowly disappearing down the empty road. I eventually fell asleep on the side of the road, and the nightmare didn't end until early morning, when I woke up to another pickup truck passing by. I waved them down, covered in dirt and sand, and thank God this man was actually normal, he and his wife. They gave me water and drove me to the nearest town where I was able to call the towing company. It was a 45-minute drive back to my car on that goddamned road, then that same distance back to bring it into a shop. Long story short, this was the worst trip and experience of my life. Having someone try to run you over and then shoot at you isn't something you simply get over. There were these woods by my parents' house that I would like to walk through a lot. I found this one very small circular clearing in the woods. It sat by a small, calming stream of water, and it had a big rock in the center that I'd like to sit on and read my books. I guess you could say I was a loner child. One day, like any other, I walked to the circle, sat on the rock, opened my book to the bookmark, and resumed my novel. It wasn't exactly midday. It was approaching the end of the day, so it was getting slightly darker in the woods. I was interrupted by footsteps behind me. I set down my book and went into the trees to see if there was a deer or other animal nearby. Black bears are what always worried me as a kid. I heard more footsteps, so I followed quietly in that direction. Whatever it was moving fast. Faster than I possibly could while trying to remain quiet. The footsteps disappeared. I figured the animal got too far away, but as long as it wasn't interested in bothering me, I didn't care what it was. I started walking back to my circle, but as soon as I got a view of it between the trees, my heart dropped to my stomach. There was someone sitting on my rock, back to me, but I could tell they were holding my book. I didn't know whether to approach or not until the man said out loud, "I don't like this book," and turned to me, as if he knew exactly where I was standing, even still behind a few trees. He said, "I watch you come here a lot." He had on this weird smile that immediately made me even more uncomfortable. My 13-year-old self didn't have a fight or flight response system. I only had a flight response instinct. The man stood up and took 1 or 2 steps towards me, and I started running. I knew the way back to my house easily. I was there after a couple minutes of running. That night, I got a knock at my window. I woke up terrified and screamed for my dad. My dad came rushing in, and when I told him, he went outside to check. I was horrified when he came rushing in, and when I told him, he went outside to check. I was outright disturbed when he came back in with my book that I left in the woods. He said it was left outside my window. I slept in my parents' room for like a week after that, and needless to say, I never returned to that circle in the woods. I had taken a job working for a company based in the mountains. They offered me a cottage to stay in while working there. It was an old home built into the side of a mountain and surrounded by the forest. I lived in the basement, which had been converted into a small living space with a bathroom, kitchen, sleeping area, and a laundry room. The laundry room was L-shaped and had a door that went out back and into the surrounding forest. The door that led to the forest was locked from the inside and was quite difficult to open. I never used that door and always kept it locked. The rest of the house was empty, but I didn't have access to it. After a day of work, I returned to my little basement for an evening reading and playing solitaire. I turned off my lamp and started to nod off when I heard a noise. The noise was like wood creaking. I played it off as my imagination, but then it repeated. I thought maybe one of the cabinets in the kitchen was latched improperly and swung open. I checked, but all the cabinets were secured. I opened my closet, thinking maybe something in there had made the sound. But again, nothing. The last place to look was the laundry room. I opened the door that connected the house to the laundry room and was instantly hit by a gust of cold night air. I slowly turned the corner and witnessed the door that led to the outside just swaying in the nighttime breeze. I am 100% certain I had this door closed, and like I said earlier, there is no way it could open on its own. I don't know what happened. Was there someone waiting in the laundry room, just waiting for me to fall asleep before sneaking out? Was it something supernatural? Either way, there are few times I had ever felt such genuine horror. Tennessee has some real characters out in nature. I hiked all around while in school there. Made some good memories with a girl in the enveloping nature. Tennessee has good roads to popular hiking sites and tons of mini trails branching off. Sometimes you need to know what to look for as far as trail markers go, because the interesting ones are always a good ways out. There's one spring waterfall that spills across a mossy granite wall, towering over a shallow stream that empties into a decent-sized pond. I went out there with a friend last time, and we got separated on the way out. I have no freaking clue how that happened. We've each been hiking for over 10 years. I've run over it 1,000 times in my mind, and it has to be this one ledge system. To get to the top of the fall, you need to take a longish detour that has an old wooden railing and a 3-way branching ledge system. So I've taken all 3 routes and ended up at the same spot. They take maybe 3 to 4 minutes to blast through, and they're kind of like rocky corridors. I don't take the left one anymore, because I'm 90% sure these big stains in the middle are blood. Don't want to know what happened there. It's odd because the left is by far the most inviting. Flowers bloom from vines that are etched into the moss-matted bedrock. Anyways, I'm 45 seconds ahead of her, and opt for the right path when I realize I should tell her to avoid the left. It's really hard to reverse given the sloping angle of the path and a few short drops that become narrow climbs. Screw it. Faster if I speed through and yell down. I get out of the right corridor and swing around to where the middle path drops off. I yell, but no reply. So she took left. I run over and climb into the left corridor, thinking she saw the stains and freaked out. To be fair, it looks like someone got bludgeoned to death. I ran up the corridor, but she was gone. I called her name, nothing. And that's what made my hair stand up. I literally heard nothing. No birds, no hum of the forest, not even wind. Just myself and the babbling water. I traced left all the way back, and noted a few side passages if you miss a couple of the jumps. No bodies were in there or the middle though. Good. I figure I may as well get to the top of the falls where I can get somewhat of an aerial view. I get there, and Ashley's sitting there waiting for me. She says she took the left path with the trail guide. What? There are no trail guides. There are rangers, but she knows the difference. They would not be in the rock labyrinth. This guy had a uniform and a trail authority visor on. She knew what I was thinking based on my face, and agreed that we should reverse course ASAP without us saying anything out loud. It's weird when you know you're being watched. We pretended we were going back to the car real quick to get more water, and so I left some fish food in a little crevice like I always did, and we left. She showed me this weird side passage that could not have existed a year before. I walked all the way around. You had to crouch, but you could walk through the labyrinth if you kept left though. Hindsight, we shouldn't have taken another way. I think he lives in those tunnels. Ashley said he kept trying to lead her in a different direction, but she just followed the light and saw him standing in the tunnel as she walked the rest of the trip to the top. That means he was in there while I was looking for her. And that means she followed him before seeing the blood splatters all over the floors and walls. And that's not the totally fucked up part. The fish food that I left in the crevice was on the hood of my car. Her water bottle was gone too. She had a carabiner to her pack, so he must have snuck up and taken it at some point. That's strange because we're fast hikers. We never went back there and never will. It was my first year of university. I had just finished unpacking all of my stuff into my room, and my family had just left. Later on that same day, my roommate finally arrived, and right from the get-go, I knew this kid was the most socially inept person I'd ever met. I introduced myself as Dan, sticking out my arm for a handshake. He paused, looked down at my arm as if he didn't understand at first, then laughed and went, "Oh," and gave me an almost dead fish handshake. I had to ask him for his name since he didn't even tell me when we shook hands. He was Dale. I tried to make small talk, but he just answered my questions with yes or no's, occasionally awkwardly laughing or smiling. Within minutes, we were both just sitting on our beds, on our laptops, not talking to each other. I was upset and planned on requesting to be placed with a different roommate. Anyone would be better than Dale. I thought Dale was just a really awkward kid, but I soon learned he was much more than just that. I met some of the other kids on my floor and they seemed cool, so that was good. I came back to my dorm after looking around campus the first night to find Dale still in the same position he was in when I left. I said, "What's up, Dale?" and he didn't answer. Not to my surprise. It was 9:30, I didn't have anything to do, so I turned out the lamp on my side of the room and went to bed. I didn't actually fall asleep anytime soon though. Dale was on his laptop until 3 in the morning. When he finally closed his laptop, I fell asleep pretty quickly, but I woke up within the hour. The blinds to our room had been opened, and the moonlight now creeping into the room made everything visible, including Dale sitting on the side of his bed, looking at me. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and said, "Dale, what the hell are you doing?" He whispered back, "Sorry," and laid down. The next morning I woke up to find Dale had already gotten up. I felt like it was the first time he left the room. It was a Saturday. The first Saturday of the year, meaning orientation and all the campus festivities. During the orientation, as my group was walking by the school gardens, I heard a couple of students ahead of me saying, "What is that kid doing in there?" I saw who they were talking about. It was Dale, literally sitting in the dirt behind a patch of bushes, rubbing the bark of a tree with his hand. The orientation leader didn't notice, otherwise I'm sure she would have said something. I just walked by not saying anything, eventually telling the 2 kids I overheard that he was my roommate as a way to start a conversation and maybe make some friends. They apologized for me. None of us really knew if it was appropriate to laugh or not, but we did. I made friends with those 2 kids, and we made plans to get together that night. I also learned when I got back to my dorm that the school found another roommate for me. Things seemed to be turning around quickly for the better. I left the room that night to go meet up with the 2 kids I met. And when I got back, Dale was sitting on the desk chair facing the door. I said, "Oh, hey, what's up?" He said nothing, very matter-of-factly. I sat down on my bed and opened my laptop, and realized I forgot to lock it. I also realized that all of my emails had been opened. Emails I was pretty sure I didn't even read, and a bunch of folders of mine had been opened. Dale must have snooped through my laptop. When I asked him if he did, he responded no very loudly half a second after I even finished my question. I could read him like a book. This creepy kid was literally going through my computer when I was out. I knew he did it, but I didn't pursue it. I was ready to go to bed, so as I went into my bed to look for my pajamas, I felt like my clothing had all been moved around as well. I knew I'd be out of there forever by tomorrow, so I didn't say anything. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of a zipper. I sat up and saw Dale on the ground, going through my bag. I turned the lamp on, this time confronting him about it. He played dumb, saying, "I think you have my toothbrush by mistake." It was the closest thing to wits that he'd shown up until that point. Still, I knew he was lying, and I knew something was wrong with him, so I couldn't get physical with him. The next day, I met my new roommate in the same building, and everything went well. Sunday night, after having a decent conversation with my roommate, who was no social butterfly, but was miles better than Dale, we both turned off our lights and went to bed. For the 3rd night in a row, I woke up at some off hour of the night to a strange noise. It was a weird clicking noise. It wasn't consistent, but I'd hear it at least twice every 30 seconds. I got up, hoping to find something innocent, like a heavy bag putting pressure on a weak floorboard, or even a mouse. But as I scoped out the room, I realized the sound was actually coming from the other side of the door. The nightlight in the common area was always on, so when I looked through the peephole, I was able to see the scalp of the person standing on the other side of our door. They were looking down, so I couldn't see their face, but now that I was paying attention, I realized the tiny clicking noises were actually coming from the doorknob. I was sure the person was trying to unlock the door. I dialed the number for the campus police department, and they showed up in under 5 minutes to the common room, and only then did I feel it was safe to open the door. I found the officers to have Dale in cuffs. I had a feeling it was him. I told them everything, that he was my former roommate who was going through my stuff, so I switched dorms, only to find him trying to break into my new dorm. They took him away. I don't know what happened to him after that, but I never saw him again. He either got suspended for the semester or expelled. I got through the rest of my years at university like anybody else. However, the nightmarish experience I had with Dale still pops up in my head every now and then. I went to Binghamton University for 2 years. I quickly made a big group of friends there and we'd go out every weekend. One weekend on a Friday night in October, when my group didn't have any big plans together, me and 2 other close friends decided to hang out in the school nature preserve by the lake. There was this little clearing on the far side of the lake that was convenient for fires. Since it was so far from view of the school or campus security, kids would sometimes, but not often, come here to smoke pot, drink, and do basically all the other drugs. It was a relatively unknown spot on campus by most, and we liked that about it. Tonight we just brought a bunch of beers, lit a fire, and hung out, having what we referred to at the time as a bro chat. As the night progressed, time seemed to pass quicker as the alcohol began to take effect. Eventually it got to the point where we were all laughing so hard that one of my 2 friends was on the floor rolling in the leaves. That was when my other friend stopped laughing and went, "Shh." We all perked up and listened, and heard the crunching of leaves and branches in the distance. We threw our bottles in the lake since we were all under 21, and it wasn't unheard of for campus police to come through the woods on weekends to catch kids doing drugs. We tucked the rest of the beers into a backpack. I was moderately drunk, so my paranoia was higher than usual. That was probably the case for all of us. The fire exposed us to anyone passing through the woods. But the thing is, this spot was so unknown and far from campus that it was rare to find anybody else that deep into the woods. It sounded like just one person in the distance. The sound of a tree branch snapping not too far away freaked all of us out. None of us were really the confrontational ones from our group, so we were lacking that one person who would have the confidence to stand up and yell out to whoever was out there. Instead, we all just sat in silence, shushing each other. We heard what seemed to be somebody or something circling us, or at least walking around in a C shape around our little campsite. It literally started to feel like we were in the movie The Blair Witch Project, because these sounds in the near distance, like cracking tree branches and leaves crunching on the ground, kept echoing over to our campsite. We laughed about it at first, but I personally soon became terrified of who or what it could be. Out of the blue, a huge thud made all 3 of us jump. At first I didn't understand, even though I saw what caused the sound. It took me a few seconds to digest the fact that a branch had been thrown into the center of our little fire site. One of my 2 friends took off running, while my other friend and I sat behind, looking at each other, half laughing, half concerned. I feel like we didn't know yet if this was some kind of joke or not. Then, my friend let out a scream of pain, as he was struck in the face by another tree branch. I grabbed the backpack, helped my friend up off the floor, and we hauled ass back in the direction of our dorm. When we made it to the road separating the nature preserve from our dorm, we stopped to catch our breath. But whoever was out there proved to be following us when we heard footsteps coming closer to the road. We continued to run back to the dorm, and when we got back to our floor, we found our other friend in his room already. We looked out of his room window down to the woods. There was someone pacing back and forth by the woods, and every time a car passed, they would walk back into the woods. Eventually, whoever it was went back into the woods for good, to never be seen again by us. We continued our drinking session in the dorm room, and within 10 minutes we were all laughing about it. It wasn't until the next morning that we all realized how terrifying that experience actually was. We never really went back into the woods past dark after that. This takes place during the first week of school, my freshman year at the University of Iowa. I was just starting to get comfortable with my roommate. He was dedicated to the idea of rushing a fraternity, and rush week was starting the next week, but the parties were starting Thursday of the first week. My roommate didn't want to go alone because it would be harder to meet people that way, so he wanted me to go. I happily agreed to go with him. Even though I had no interest in rushing a fraternity, I still had intentions to go to parties. After all, I was attending a party school. My roommate wanted to go to one frat party on Thursday, and then parties at different frat houses on Friday and Saturday. On this Thursday night, we were headed to perhaps one of the lowest ranked frats. I'm pretty sure it was an underground one too. But his logic in attending was to have a backup frat in case the higher ones wouldn't give him a bid. The frat house was really far from campus in a much more slummy downtown area. We pulled up to a corner house, and if it weren't for the blasting music and cars parked everywhere, we would never picture this house as a frat house. It literally looked like they settled with the first house they found. We knocked on the door to immediately be greeted by some short, chubby guy in a white t-shirt holding a Solo cup. His shirt had sweat stains by his armpits and mid-belly area. He told us to come right in. The party itself was in a horribly dimly lit room with probably 50 guys bunched up into the living room. It was hot as hell in there to make it even worse. I think I saw maybe 2 girls at the entire party, neither of them even close to attractive. I gave the party a good 20 minutes, talking with one overweight foreigner after another, all giving off antisocial vibes. Eventually I waved for my roommate to get ready to leave, but a huge group of guys by the door made us decide to wait a little longer to avoid the awkwardness of leaving early. I continued to drink the cheap beers they were serving. I think I downed 5 cups before I could even feel a buzz. A heavy guy approached me with a tiny bottle in his hand and handed it to me, smirking and saying, "That'll get you shit-faced." I fake laughed and thanked him, expecting him to go away, but he just watched me as if he were waiting for me to drink it. So, I did. It was maybe 2 shots worth of some kind of hard liquor. The guy then started making conversation with me, and every time I hinted that I was trying to get away, he would try to pull me further into this otherwise one-sided conversation. Things started to get really blurry pretty soon. I remember feeling dizzy all of a sudden, and the room seemed to be getting darker. That was the last thing I remember before waking up in a dark room, laying in a bed. I could hear the sound of music muffled behind closed doors, so I knew I was still in the frat house. It was a very dark room, however I could still make out certain furniture in the room, and a small closet door, not much else though. But even over the blaring music, I heard the sound of a plastic bag being crunched from the closet, as if somebody had stepped on it by mistake. I ran out of that room and down the stairs back to the overcrowded living room. I found my roommate and pushed him out the front door, past the group of guys still standing in a circle right next to it. During the car ride back to campus, I told my roommate I was drugged. He almost called the cops, but I said it would be foolish and pointless. My roommate then asked me an awkward question. Was I taken advantage of? I didn't feel any type of pain, and my clothes were all still on the same, so I assumed not. When I did a time check, I realized I'd only been out for maybe 10 minutes before waking up. Whatever the guy gave me must have been a dud or something, thank God. That was my college experience of attending an underground ghetto frat party, and it remains to be my scariest life experience. I had a single dorm my first semester of sophomore year. It was in the corner of the floor, kind of secluded from the rest of the dorm rooms, since it was in its own little section. You had to turn a corner to even see the door. It was nice because I'd be able to still talk with friends on my floor, invite people over to my room, and still have privacy when it was time to do homework or go to sleep. A few weeks into the semester, while studying for a bio exam, the silence was interrupted by a noise. It took me a bit to realize it was a light tapping on the door. It was so light that I almost didn't even hear it. I yelled, "Come in," but the door didn't open, so I got up to open it. Nobody was there. I walked around the corner to look down the hall. Nobody. Somebody was obviously messing with me. I went back to my bed and continued studying, this time leaving the door open. Nobody came back. The next night, a few minutes after shutting the lamp in my bedroom to go to bed, the tapping on the door returned, only this time it was much louder, more of a knocking sound. I called out, "Who is it?" and again the knocking stopped and nobody answered. I got out of my bed quickly and opened the door to see my small private corridor was void of any people. Again, I ran the 10 feet from my door to the corner to look down the main hallway of the floor. Nobody. The next morning, I asked some of the other kids in the dorm if they had been messing with me. Everyone said no. The next night, I woke up after having been asleep for 3 hours. Someone was knocking on my door again, this time louder than ever. I had trouble deciding whether to open the door or not this time. With a bout of courage, I hopped up and opened the door. Nobody was there as I was expecting, but this time I full-on sprinted down the tiny corridor isolating my room, and when I turned the corner, I saw the back of somebody disappearing behind the far corner on the opposite side of the hallway. I ran as fast as I could down the hallway, and as I turned to the next hallway where I saw the person a few seconds earlier, I saw a door at the end of the hallway shutting. It wasn't a dorm room, it was a bathroom. I felt like I was ready to confront whoever this joker was, so I pushed open the bathroom door with force. The light was off. I turned it on expecting to see somebody hiding in there, but I didn't see anyone. My first instinct was to check the 2 bathroom stalls, which were both shut. I got on my hands and knees and looked under the 2 stalls. 2 heavy black boots could be seen from underneath one of the stall doors. I took a deep breath and pushed the stall open. I was confused. There were the boots sitting on the floor, but no person to wear them. And then I heard a creepy giggling noise. Not a feminine or childlike one. It was a kind of laughing that I could only imagine to be that of a really old crazy man. For some reason my confidence was gone and I was scared shitless. Therefore I ran back to my room and shut the door. I hopped back in my bed and started texting every friend I had. Of course everybody was asleep though. The knocking happened one more time that night. I ignored it. It went on for about 30 seconds before whoever that person was finally gave up. I spoke to everybody on my floor the next day. Nobody else heard any knocking, and everybody swore they weren't pranking me. Everybody seemed sincere. I don't know why this person chose to harass me, or who this person was. Judging by the boots and the laughing I heard, this was an older man though, and that disturbs me. I was living alone in a small rental house just outside town when this happened. It was a 1-story place at the end of a short dead-end road. There were only 5 houses on the street, and at night it was usually quiet. I worked from home doing freelance graphic design, so most days I didn't leave unless I had to get groceries. I didn't get visitors often. My friends usually texted before coming over. That's why the first knock stood out. It was around 8:45 at night on a Thursday. I was in the living room watching TV when I heard 4 firm knocks on the front door. I muted the TV and waited, thinking maybe I imagined it. Then there were 2 more knocks. I got up and walked to the door. There's a small peephole in the center of it. When I looked through, I saw a man standing on my porch holding a medium-sized cardboard box. He was wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He looked normal, maybe mid-30s. I opened the door, but kept the chain on. He immediately said that he had a delivery that required a signature. He read a name off a small handheld device. It wasn't my name. It wasn't even close. I told him he had the wrong address. He looked down at the box, then at the device, then back at me. He read the address out loud. It was my exact address. I told him no one by that name lived here. He stared at me for a second longer than necessary. Then he said he must have been given the wrong information and would take it back to the truck. I watched him walk back down my driveway. I expected to see a delivery van or at least a car parked somewhere nearby, but there was nothing. He walked past my mailbox and turned the corner at the end of the street. I didn't see where he went. I shut the door and locked it. I told myself it was just a small company delivery or maybe a contractor driver without a marked vehicle. The next night, at almost the exact same time, there were 3 knocks again. This time I didn't open the door right away. I went to the peephole first. It was the same man with the same jacket and box. I didn't open the door. I just spoke through it and told him he already came by and that no one with that name lived here. He didn't answer right away. Then he said he just needed a signature and that the system showed the package had to be delivered tonight. I told him I wasn't signing for someone I didn't know. There was a long pause. Then he said okay and stepped back from the door. I stayed at the peephole. Instead of walking away right away, he stood at the edge of the porch looking at the house. He slowly turned his head toward my front windows, then toward the side of the house, then back at the door. After about 15 seconds, he finally walked down the driveway. Again, I saw no vehicle. That's when it started to feel wrong. On the third night, there was no knock. I actually felt relieved. I thought maybe he figured out the mistake. I even joked to myself about how weird it would have been if he showed up again. On the fourth night, I was in the kitchen washing dishes around 9 p.m. when I heard 4 knocks. It wasn't on the front door. It was on the side of the house near the dining room window. I slowly walked into the dining room and looked toward the window, but no one was there. Then there were 4 more knocks at the front door. I went to the peephole, and it was him again. But this time he wasn't holding a box. His hands were empty. I didn't say anything, and he knocked again. Then he stepped back and looked directly at the peephole. I stepped away from the door so he couldn't see movement, and I didn't make a sound. After about 30 seconds, he turned and walked away. I waited 5 full minutes before checking the windows. I walked around the house with the lights off and looked through the blinds. I saw him standing across the street near the tree line. He was just standing there facing my house. After maybe a minute, he walked off into the darkness. I relocked every window and door again, even though they were already locked. The next day, I called the local police non-emergency line and explained what had been happening. The officer I spoke to said it sounded like someone trying to verify occupancy. He said sometimes burglars will knock to see if someone answers before trying to break in later. He told me to install cameras if I could and to call 911 if the man came back. That night, I left all the lights off in the front of the house and stayed in my bedroom. Around 8:45, right on time, there were 4 knocks. I didn't respond at all. After a few seconds, 4 more. Then silence. I waited about a minute. Then I heard something else. A soft thud against the back of my house, and then another. I realized it sounded like someone testing the back door. I grabbed my phone and quietly walked into the hallway. I could hear the back doorknob turning slowly, and then stopping, and then turning again. I called 911 like I was instructed and whispered that someone was trying to get into my house. While I was on the phone, the knocking started again at the front door. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. The back doorknob kept turning. There was more than one person. Then I heard the sound of something metal scraping lightly against the doorframe. After about 30 seconds, everything stopped. Even as it was totally silent though, I stayed on the phone until the police arrived. When they searched the outside of the house, they found fresh pry marks on the back door near the handle. The officer told me if I hadn't been home, the door likely would have been forced open. They drove around but didn't find anyone suspicious. The next night, I stayed at my brother's apartment across town. I didn't tell anyone on social media or anything that I wasn't home. I just left. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang. It was my neighbor from 2 houses down. She said there was someone standing on my porch knocking repeatedly. She said he had been there for at least 5 minutes. She asked if I was home. I told her no and asked if he had a vehicle. She said she didn't see one. I told her to call the police. Officers arrived and questioned him. Later that night, an officer called me and said the man claimed he was trying to deliver a package, but he misplaced it. He had no company ID and no marked vehicle. They warned him to stay away from the property. 2 days later, police arrested him in a nearby neighborhood after he was caught attempting to break into a house where the owner was out of town. In his car, they found multiple empty cardboard boxes and a small handheld scanner that wasn't connected to any real delivery company. During questioning, he admitted he would knock with a fake package first. If someone answered, he would leave and mark the house as occupied. If no one answered after multiple attempts, he would come back later and force entry. He told detectives that sometimes he would knock several nights in a row to see if the pattern changed. If lights were on one night and off the next, he assumed the house was empty. Hearing that made me realize how close I was to not being home that first week. If I had ignored the door on one of those early nights, he probably would have come back later expecting no one inside. I moved out of that house 3 months later when my lease ended. I still don't answer the door at night unless I know exactly who's coming over. If someone knocks unexpectedly, I stay quiet and check cameras first. And if anyone ever shows up with a package that has my address but not my name, I don't even go near the door anymore. This story starts in the lead up to Christmas. To set the scene, I live near Glasgow in Scotland. I stay with my parents, siblings, cats, and dogs. We're a close-knit family and often spend nights together in the living room watching TV, playing games, and catching up on our lives. At the time of this story, I was 16 turning 17. I was in high school, but getting closer to leaving and starting my education outside of it. In the days leading up to Christmas, during one of those late nights together, we were watching A Christmas Carol. We often have movie nights around Christmas, and it's one of my favorite things about that time of year. During the movie, we heard a knock at the door. This wasn't unusual, so we didn't think much of it. My mom got up to answer it, but nobody was there. The street was empty. Our garden wraps from the front of the house around to the back, so she checked along the side of the house too, but there was nobody there either. She came back inside, and we resumed the movie. A few days later, I was sitting at the living room table doing exam work when I heard another knock. I paused my work and went to answer the door, but again, nobody was there. We assumed it was probably neighborhood kids playing a prank. Where I'm from, kids sometimes get bored and cause trouble instead of finding something better to do. In Scotland, there's a game called Chappie, where kids knock on someone's door and run away laughing. It's stupid, but as a kid, the adrenaline rush of someone opening the door to nobody there can be weirdly fun. We have a family group chat where we keep each other updated on things, and throughout that week, several family members mentioned experiencing the same thing. The one that stood out the most was something my dad experienced. At the time, my dad usually stayed up later than everyone else, either playing Xbox or watching shows once the house was quiet. One night around 11:30, when the street was silent and all the kids would have been inside, he heard a very quiet knock. He was confused because of the time. He checked through the peephole before opening the door, but he saw nobody. He slowly unlocked and opened the door to look outside. Again, nobody was there, just a quiet, empty street. He locked the door and came upstairs to ask if anyone had heard it, but because the knock was so quiet, nobody else had. This started to unsettle us because it had been happening repeatedly. Nobody had ever seen or heard anyone outside except for the knocking itself. Usually when kids do this, you hear them laughing or running away. This felt different. Christmas Day is when everything escalated. We spent the day with family, opening presents, sharing gifts, watching movies, playing games, and eating way too much food. It was a great day. Later that night, I felt sick from eating so much, which I always do Christmas, so I went upstairs to lie down. I ended up dozing off and woke up hours later. When I checked my phone, it said 2:01 a.m. Everyone else was in bed and the house was completely silent. I knew I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep because once I woke up, it's hard for me to sleep again no matter what time it is. I stayed on my phone in the dark scrolling social media instead of turning the TV on, watching Christmas present haul videos and messaging friends who were still awake. It's normal during Christmas break when there's no school or responsibilities, and you try to enjoy the freedom before going back to exams and routines. After a while, I heard a faint knock. I wasn't sure if it came from my door, my window, or if I imagined it. I sat up straight in bed, staring into the dark room with my heart racing. I didn't want to move. I knew nobody should be outside at that time on Christmas night. I didn't know if the past few weeks were just getting into my head, or if someone was actually inside the house. My room is on the second floor, so someone being at my window would be very unlikely. After what felt like forever, I finally worked up the courage to open my bedroom door. As I did, I heard what sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs. My brain immediately assumed it was my dad coming up to bed after staying up late like he usually did. I stepped into view of the staircase to tell him I was still awake and heard the knocking again. That's when I realized it wasn't my dad. It was a man I'd never seen before. I immediately felt sick when I saw him. I wondered if this was the person behind all the knocking. He was already inside the house. He was staggering as he climbed the stairs and looked heavily intoxicated. I slowly backed into my room, luckily without him seeing me, and I quietly shut my door. I could hear him walking around and opening doors, going into each room one by one. I remember thinking it was only a matter of time before he reached mine. I completely froze and didn't know what to do. It felt like all my common sense disappeared. Eventually, I opened my door slightly and saw him coming out of my younger sister's room. That's when my brain finally kicked back into action. I ran to my parents' room and woke them up, telling them there was a man inside the house. My mom woke up instantly while my dad was still groggy. We went downstairs together and found the man passed out on the couch with my dad's beers opened and scattered around him. My mom shouted at him to get out. He woke slightly and angrily insisted the house belonged to him. We tried to get him up, but he was completely dead weight. My mom slapped him trying to wake him, but he barely reacted. A few minutes later, my dad came fully downstairs, saw what was happening, and immediately took control of the situation. He shouted at the man that this was not his house and threatened him to leave. The man refused. My dad eventually had to physically lift him off the couch and drag him out the side door. He forced him outside and warned him not to come back before shutting the door. We thought it was finally over, but seconds later, glass suddenly shattered toward us. The man had punched through the window, sending broken glass inside. He pushed his face inside the broken glass like something out of The Shining while my dad went to call the police. The man started shouting aggressive threats, saying he now owned the house, that he knew what we looked like, and that he would return. Needless to say, we were all in shock. It was hard to believe someone would do something like this on Christmas night. Eventually he left and the police arrived. They took statements from all of us. Mine was the longest since I had seen him first. Not long after, the police left. Luckily, because it was the winter, it had snowed that night, which is actually rare where we live since we usually just get slush. There was a clear trail of blood leading down the street. Police followed it to a nearby playground where they found the man lying on the ground with blood and glass in his hands. They arrested him after, and later confirmed they believed he was the intruder. Our window was replaced the next morning. We told my siblings what had happened. Surprisingly, they slept through the whole thing, probably knocked out from all the Christmas food. Later, I got a restraining order against the man because of my age and the threats he made. He was fined for the damage and given community service instead of jail time. When police questioned him about the weeks of knocking at our door before the incident, he claimed he knew nothing about that and denied ever doing it. It turned out, he actually lived in our house years before we moved in. He claimed there was no bad intention and said he had simply drank too much while out with friends and accidentally went into the wrong house. Thankfully, nobody in our family was seriously hurt. The only injury was my mom bruising her wrist from slapping him while wearing bracelets. Apparently that hurts you more than the person you hit. To this day, we still have no explanation for the knocking that happened before that night. Even now, sometimes I feel like I hear a knock late at night. Maybe it's just in my head, or maybe it isn't. I guess I'll never know if it was him or someone else out there watching. This happened around 2010 when I was about 6 years old. My family and I were living in a small neighborhood in Springfield, Oregon. It was my older brother, sister, my mom, and I, as my dad was deployed at the time. I was really close with my dad and always took it hard when he was away. Late one night, I sat on the porch with my mom while she smoked a cigarette and we watched the rain. While we were sitting there, cold but enjoying the rain and each other's company, we noticed a man walking in the middle of the road. He was wearing one of those oversized yellow rain jackets. It immediately caught both of our attention because it was pouring rain really late and there was no one else usually out at that hour. We sat there watching him as he began walking slightly toward our driveway. My mom stood up, grabbed my hand, put her cigarette out, and we watched as the man stopped walking right next to our garbage cans in our driveway. My mom turned to take us inside, and the man began yelling at us. I don't remember what he said, but I remember being so terrified as my mom rushed me inside. As soon as we got inside, my mom locked the door and turned off all the lights. At that point, I was terrified, and of course, being a kid, I started crying. My mom rushed my siblings and I, shushing us, and we all went and laid in my parents' king-size bed together as we were all a bit worried. But nothing else happened. There was no more yelling or noise or anything, so we all drifted to sleep. That night, I had a terrible nightmare I can still picture to this day. It was of a man in a big yellow rain jacket peering through our window. I woke up terrified and crying, literally shaking my sister awake just so I could tell her I was scared. I have no idea how much time passed. My sister got out of bed and walked me to the bathroom that was attached to the bedroom. She shut the door and spoke with me while I cried, trying not to wake my mom or brother. But while we were in there, we suddenly heard banging. Loud banging on the front door. My sister burst out of the bathroom and started shaking my mom awake without saying anything, and naturally my brother woke up from the sound too. I sat terrified in the bathroom while my mom motioned for my siblings to join me in there. We watched her walk out of the room toward the front door. My siblings and I were all crying, scared out of our minds, as this man was still repeatedly banging on the door. My mom must have been trying to find her old BlackBerry phone, but seemingly failed, because when she came back, she didn't have it. That meant none of us could call the police since this was the only phone in the house. We sat there in silence listening to the man, who was now screaming and yelling for us to let him in while still banging loudly on the door. It was honestly a really hopeless and fearful night. It was just the 5 of us with no phone to call the police, and my dad, who is normally our protector, was gone. We sat there on the floor huddled together, freaking out and praying our neighbors would call the police, but nothing happened. Eventually the man left, but no police ever came. What was strange is that it was a small neighborhood where everyone lived close together, and our house specifically was a duplex, so how not a single neighbor heard this and called the police is beyond me. Eventually we went to sleep, and everything was okay for a while, but not even a few weeks later, still just the 5 of us at my home, my family woke up to my front door wide open, along with a window open and a huge hole cut into the window screen. My mom immediately called the police. There were lots of random items missing, including my piggy bank filled with all my holiday savings, along with random items around the house. But the most disturbing thing missing was a giant vase filled with cash and coins that my family had been saving for months. The sickening part was that it had been on my nightstand right next to my bed where we were all sleeping. This was a long time ago, and sadly my mom has since passed, and my dad wasn't there when it happened, so I'm not really sure what other details I might have missed. I do know that the intruder was never caught. I also don't know if the same man who was harassing us that night was the same person who broke into our house weeks later. It could be connected or it could not be. I do know that none of us were harmed, which makes me feel like maybe it wasn't the same person, because that man seemed really aggressive for someone who just wanted money. But on the other hand, I later found what looked like the same giant vase sitting on the porch of a neighbor who was a man that lived alone and that we never really saw. So honestly, who knows? This happened to me almost 3 years ago, almost to the day, while I was in Idaho serving a full-time mission. The town that me and my companion, who I'll refer to as Spencer, were assigned to was quite small, so there wasn't always a lot for us to do, and on top of this, at the time, I was going through a rough patch. Things like self-esteem issues and having trouble sleeping, so as a result, we found it difficult to stay out all day doing work. One other thing about where we were assigned was that we were living in an actual house, albeit a tiny one. Usually we only ever get apartments, but I guess for this area, a house was the only option, probably because there were no apartments anywhere nearby. The layout of the house was fairly simple. As you walked through the front door, you entered the main room where our desks were, and immediately to your right was our bedroom. If you kept walking straight, you would walk through a large open doorway that led right into the kitchen. From there, to your right was the bathroom, and to your left was the laundry room. And that was it, besides one storage closet in the kitchen as well. One other detail was that although the house technically stood on its own lot, the landlord's house was right next door, and anytime we had problems with something, we could just walk over or call him. On this particular night, I was sitting in the living room at my desk on my phone with my chair turned to face the kitchen, and Spencer was sitting in the bedroom on his phone. It had gotten dark outside a couple of hours earlier, so we returned home and were just relaxing before we went to bed. In the middle of whatever I was doing, I heard a single knock come from the window above the sink, and because of the layout of the house, where this window was, you could basically see the whole living area where I was sitting. I looked up at the window for a few seconds, but only saw darkness. I went back to what I was doing and began to think that it must have just been a branch or something. There were large trees behind the house, but the more I thought about it, the more unlikely it seemed. None of the trees were close enough to the house to brush the window that way, and it wouldn't have made a knock sound like the one I heard. In the middle of having this thought, I heard another knock around the corner at the window in the laundry room. The full weight of what was happening was finally coming into focus, but my mind was still looking for an explanation that didn't conclude that someone was outside circling the house, stalking my companion and I. I started to tell Spencer what I had heard from the living room, but as I was, another knock came from the window in the living room, the one right next to me. I didn't see who it was on the other side, and I didn't want to. I jumped up and ran into the bedroom and locked the door. I asked Spencer if he heard it too, and he said yes. We started debating what to do. All we had for weapons were a couple of knives, and we didn't know how many people were actually out there, or if they were armed, so going to confront them on our own was out of the question. During our discussion, the knocking sound moved from the window in the living room to the front door itself, and we were getting more and more freaked out. We briefly debated calling the police, but we were in the middle of nowhere, and it would take them forever to get out there to help us. Then Spencer remembered we had the landlord's number. He called him and began explaining the situation, and by this point, we hadn't heard a knock at the door for a couple of minutes or so, but I knew what that meant, and I was dreading it when it finally came. A knock at our bedroom window. The blinds were closed, so we couldn't see who it was, and they couldn't see us, but that didn't make me feel much better. Spencer told him someone was stalking the house, and he said he would be right out with a shotgun. We waited for another few minutes, anticipating another knock, but nothing happened until finally our landlord came to the door and announced himself. We asked him if he had seen anyone, and he said no, but that he saw a pickup truck speeding away as he approached the house. I asked if he had gotten a license plate or any other features that could help the police, but he said they had already been too far away for him to see anything. Spencer and I grabbed our flashlights and circled the house with him. There were small patches of snow on the ground from a weather system that had come through a few days earlier, and in the snow, we saw footprints indeed circling the house, and as far as we could tell, there was only one set. We debated calling the police, but we knew that they wouldn't be much help in tracking the guy down. The landlord said to call him again if the guy came back, and with that, we went back into the house, locked everything down, and tried to sleep, but we couldn't. The first thing that came to mind was other missionaries playing a prank on us. But if that was the case, then why didn't they reveal themselves or say gotcha or something like that at some point? Also, it was past curfew. Everyone was supposed to be home, and the closest missionaries to us were at least 20 minutes away. The other possibility was that it was some teenagers from the ward playing a prank, but that didn't seem likely either, especially afterwards, because again, they would have come back and started laughing at us. And there was only one set of footprints we found. If it was a prank, I feel like that would have been a group thing to do. After the fact, no one ever fessed up when we did some asking around. So to this day, we still have no idea who was outside or why they chose to harass us. But the scariest thing to me wasn't the knocking or how the only thing separating us from him was a thin layer of glass, but the fact that I likely looked right at this guy when he first knocked on the window in the kitchen and didn't even know it. From that day forward, my sleep only got worse, nothing worked, and my own personal issues did not improve either. I'm not sure I'll ever go back to that house. Back in 2020, when the pandemic was still causing all kinds of chaos, I started driving for Uber to make ends meet. I was laid off from my retail job and needed quick income. The thing about rideshare gigs is you see all kinds of people, especially when you're working late nights like I was. There were awkward encounters, drunk passengers, weird conversations, but none of that compares to what happened one Friday night in October. It was a little after midnight, and I had just dropped someone off at a hotel near the outskirts of town. My app pinged almost immediately with a new request. The pickup location was about 6 minutes away, in front of a bowling alley that was part of a strip mall. Pretty standard stuff. The name on the ride said Derek. I accepted it and started heading over. The area was quiet when I arrived, just a few dim parking lot lights. No cars in sight, and the bowling alley looked closed. But there was a man standing alone under one of the lights wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with his hands in his pockets, head down like he was looking at his shoes. As I pulled up, he looked at me, but didn't wave or move. I rolled down the window and said, "You Derek?" He nodded slowly, walked over, and got into the back seat behind me. I started the trip and asked him if the destination in the app was correct, an address about 20 minutes away in a residential neighborhood I'd never been to. He said, "Yeah, that's right," in a quiet, calm voice. I remembered thinking he sounded a little off. Not drunk or high, just sort of flat, emotionless. But I didn't think too hard about it at the time. I started driving, and he didn't say anything for the next 5 or 6 minutes. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror now and then, and every time I looked, he was staring straight ahead. Not out the window or at his phone, just at the back of my head. I tried to break the silence by asking how his night was going. He paused, then said, "Just needed to get out of there." I asked, "Out of where?" He said, "Doesn't matter." So I didn't push it. We drove a while longer. About 15 minutes in, I realized we were getting closer to the destination, but the address was in a really isolated part of town. No streetlights, big yards, and lots of trees. As we approached the address, he suddenly leaned forward and said, "Actually, can you pull into that driveway right there?" He pointed to a house on the right. The house was dark, no lights on inside or out. It looked old and abandoned, honestly. It had an overgrown lawn and paint peeling on the siding. There was also no car in the driveway. I said, "Is this your place?" And he said, "Just pull in." I hesitated, but turned into the driveway. I stopped near the front of the house and put the car in park. He didn't get out. I looked back at him and said, "Everything all right?" He stared at the front door and said, "Wait here." Then he got out and started walking toward the house. He didn't go to the front door. He walked around the side of the building and disappeared from view. I sat there for maybe 2 minutes, trying to decide what to do. The ride was technically still going. I didn't want to drive off and get penalized, but I also felt like something wasn't right. My gut told me this guy wasn't just heading inside to grab something. Finally, I ended the trip manually. I marked it as complete and started to back out of the driveway, but before I could shift into reverse, I saw him walking back toward the car, fast. His hands were empty, and he had this strange look on his face, like he was angry or excited. I unlocked the doors because I didn't want to make it a confrontation, but something in me was screaming not to let him back in. He opened the rear door, got in, and said, "Take me to the other place." I asked, "What other place?" He said, "Just drive, I'll tell you." I said, "You need to put it in the app." He didn't answer. He just stared at me in the mirror. I said again, "I can't take you anywhere unless you put it in the app." He didn't say a word. After a few seconds, he told me to drive to where I picked him up. I didn't want to argue anymore, so I started heading back toward the strip mall. The whole way there, I felt this pressure in the car. He wasn't talking, but I could feel him watching me. The hairs on my arms were standing up. He was still staring at the back of my head. At one point, I tried to lighten the mood. I said, "Rough night?" He replied, "You could say that." I asked if everything's all right, and he said, "Not yet." I didn't ask any more questions. When we got back to the strip mall, I parked under the same light where I picked him up, but before I could say anything, he leaned forward and asked, "You ever wonder how you're gonna die?" I froze. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Not really something I think about." He didn't laugh. He just leaned back in his seat, and after a few seconds, he said, "I think about it all the time." Then he opened the door and got out without another word. He didn't close the door right away. He just stood there for a second, half in and half out of the car. Then he looked at me and said, "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." He shut the door and walked off into the darkness behind the bowling alley. I sat there for a minute, too shaken to move. Eventually, I drove home, constantly checking my mirrors. When I got home, I looked at the trip details again. Something was off. The name had changed. It no longer said Derek. It was blank. No name, no profile picture, no trip history. It was like the ride never happened. I contacted Uber support to report it, but they told me the trip data was unavailable. They said sometimes that happens if the app crashes or if the rider cancels midway. But I know what I saw. I know I completed the trip. I know the man got in and out of my car, and I know he said what he said. You picked the wrong guy up tonight. I've never seen him again, and I hope I never do. But every time I get a ping in a dimly lit parking lot or have a silent passenger in the back seat, I remember that night. And I remember that feeling that something terrible could have happened. That maybe he changed his mind at the last second, or maybe he was never planning to do anything, just wanted to scare someone. But I still wonder what he meant, and if he ever found the right car. This happened in 2021 when I was driving for Uber full-time. I live in a city that gets a lot of tourists, especially in the summer, so rideshare gigs can be decent money if you're consistent. I worked mostly nights, partly because I'm a night owl, and partly because it's less traffic and better tips from drunk passengers coming back from bars. The night this happened, it was around 1:30 in the morning, a pretty normal Saturday night crowd. I had just dropped off a group of college kids who wouldn't stop yelling in the back of my car, so I was glad to get a request that looked quieter. The name said Chris, and the pickup location was a small side street just off downtown. The weird thing was, the pin was in kind of an odd area, not near any bars or apartments, more like near the back lot of an old strip mall. But I figured maybe it was just a bad GPS marker. It happens sometimes. I drove over and saw a guy standing at the corner, hoodie on, jeans, staring down at his phone. I pulled up and said, "Chris?" He nodded and got in the back without saying much. He didn't smell like alcohol or slur his words. He seemed sober and just really quiet. He didn't say hello, nor did he answer when I asked how his night was going. Some people just aren't talkers, so I didn't think much of it. I started the ride, and the drop-off was on the opposite side of town, 25 minutes away, in a suburban neighborhood I'd been to maybe once or twice before. The thing was, it was dark out there, like no streetlights in some areas. Pretty isolated. I noticed about 5 minutes into the trip that Chris had his phone out, but he wasn't texting or calling anyone. He was holding it flat in his lap with the flashlight on, just shining the beam upward, slightly toward my seat. I asked him kind of half joking, "Everything all right back there?" He just mumbled, "Yeah," and then turned the flashlight off. The next 20 minutes were dead silent, just the hum of the engine and a weird tension building in the car. I don't know how to describe it. Something just felt off about this guy. Not threatening, but definitely unsettled, like he wasn't really there. We got to the neighborhood, and I followed the GPS to the house. But as we pulled up, I noticed it was totally dark. No porch light, no inside lights, nothing. I asked, "Is this the right place?" Chris didn't answer. He just sat there. I turned around and looked at him. I repeated myself a little louder, saying, "Hey, is this it?" He stared past me out the window. I repeated myself one more time, and finally he nodded. So I put the car in park and said, "Have a good night." He didn't move. He just sat there. So I asked again, "Are you good?" He finally reached for the handle and stepped out, but he didn't close the door. He just stood outside the car with the door open, facing the house. I sat there waiting. A few seconds passed, then 20, and then a full minute. I was just about to say something when he suddenly turned around, looked at me through the open door and said, "I need to go back." I blinked and said, "Back where?" He said, "Where you picked me up." His tone was flat with no emotion. I didn't know what to say. That was a 25-minute drive, and it wasn't like I could just reverse the trip. I told him he'd have to request a new ride, but he just stared at me. He begged me, saying, "Please, I need to go back." I told him again, "You need to request it through the app." That's when he said something that sent chills up my spine. He said, "I can't. They're not gone yet." My only response could be, "Who's not gone?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, still holding the door open, and I noticed he was breathing heavily. At that point, I started getting seriously uncomfortable. I said, "Look, I can't just start a new ride unless you request it." He stared for another second, then slowly backed away and closed the door. He walked toward the house, even though it was pitch black and looked empty. I waited until he got to the porch before I pulled off. The moment I turned the corner, I ended the trip in the app and started heading back toward downtown. A couple blocks down, I stopped at a 24-hour gas station to use the bathroom and get a drink. I parked at the side of the building, went inside, and came back out maybe 4 minutes later. And when I got back to my car, I felt like my brain short-circuited. Chris was sitting in the back seat, same hoodie and same expression. I thought I had locked the doors before going inside, but somehow he was in the back of the car. I opened the driver's side door and stepped back in slowly, keeping my eye on him through the mirror. "How did you get back in?" I asked. He just said, "Take me back." I said, "I'm calling the cops," and reached for my phone. That's when he leaned forward, close enough for me to hear his breath, and said, "They're still in the house." I don't know why, but I didn't call the police. Something about the way he said that made me feel like he was having some kind of episode. I played along and said, "Whose house is that?" And he said, "My parents." I asked him if he lived there, and he said not anymore. That made the hairs stand up on my neck. I started slowly driving back to where I picked him up. Every part of me was screaming not to do it, but I didn't know what else to do. As we got closer, he started breathing heavier. He was rocking slightly in the back seat. At one point, he whispered, "They're still there. They won't leave, no matter what I do." When we pulled up to the house, there were still no lights, still no signs of anyone living there. He got out without saying anything and then walked up to the front door and stood there. He didn't knock or anything, he just stood still. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then pulled away again, making damn sure the doors were locked. I drove 3 blocks, parked under a streetlight, and sat there for 10 minutes trying to process what just happened. I debated calling the cops, but what would I even say? That a guy got into my car twice and said weird things? There was no crime technically as far as I knew, so I just drove home and didn't sleep that night. The next day, I reported the ride to Uber, and honestly, I regretted not reporting this to the police because the man might have been sick in the head needing help. I hope he didn't hurt anyone. Who knows if that house was even really his parents' house, or if he actually was just having a manic episode. I'm an 18-year-old girl that lives alone in my apartment with my dog. I live about 8 miles out of town, so getting food delivered can be a hassle sometimes. I never thought anything of Uber Eats being bad. You may hear some stories, but never think they will happen to you. At least that's what I thought. It was Friday evening. I was cleaning my apartment, getting ready for my boyfriend to come over. We're long distance, so I only get to see him on weekends, so I usually try to get it cleaned up before he arrives on Saturday. I had been cleaning for about 2 hours, and it was past 6 p.m., so I was feeling hungry. I didn't want to dirty any dishes, as I just cleaned them all and cleaned the kitchen. I decided to order food so I wouldn't have to make a mess. I ordered my food and got the notification that my driver was on his way and driving a white Honda Fit Sport. I'm a young girl living on my own, so I have my delivery instructions set to leave my order at my door for contactless delivery. I was sitting in my living room watching TV when I got the notification that my food was delivered. As soon as I got that notification, I jumped up, eager to get my food. I was starving. When I opened the door to grab my food, it wasn't there, so I thought maybe he set it at the wrong door. But looking down at all the doors, none of them had the food at them. So I went back in and was gonna message him when I heard a knock at my door. It was my next door neighbor. He was holding my food. He said, "Hey, sorry, I picked up your food from your delivery driver because he was looking through your windows, and I wasn't sure what he was doing." I took the food and thanked him, wondering what the hell just happened. I went back in, ate my food, and enjoyed a movie when I started to get ready for bed. I took a shower, then went to turn off my TV and make sure all my doors were locked before going to bed. I laid down in bed, called my boyfriend, and eventually ended up falling asleep. I woke up a few times during the night to my dog growling at the window or the back door. My dog isn't a huge, scary dog. He's a small 5-pound Morkie, but it's still pretty scary when he growls at something and catches you off guard. I finally got him to calm down and go back to sleep. It wasn't even 15 minutes later that I woke up to banging on my window. My dog started going crazy, barking, growling, and even whimpering. I couldn't move in my bed. I took the bed sheets and pulled them over my head, just leaving enough to not cover my eyes so I could see the window. I called the police and whispered into the phone quietly. I explained to the operator that someone is in my backyard and my window doesn't lock so it can easily be lifted up. She told me to go to a different room and police would be at my apartment shortly. I ran to my kitchen and grabbed a knife, just waiting to see blue and red lights or hear sirens. It felt like forever. I looked out the window of my kitchen and never expected to see what I saw. The Uber driver's car that delivered my food. His car was sitting across the street from my apartment. When you open the door to my apartment, there's a large open field to the left that's used for parking trailers and letting dogs play. He was parked there, but I didn't see anyone in the car. I put two and two together and thought to myself, he's in my backyard. The police finally arrived. I could barely even speak. I was shaking and crying. I explained to one officer what happened, while the other went to check out my backyard, which is where my bedroom window is. Another officer who arrived went to check his car because it was still in the field, but he wasn't in his car. The two officers came back and started talking with the officer I was speaking to, telling her there's footprints in my backyard, which it had just rained the night before, so it was very muddy outside. I started panicking once I heard that, not just because that's not what you want to hear, but also because where was this guy if he didn't come back arrested with the cops and wasn't in his car? My neighbor came outside to see what was going on. The officers explained to him what was happening. Then he spoke about how he picked up my food for me earlier that day. The neighbor invited me to sleep over at his apartment for the night if it made me feel any better. Oddly, I passed on the offer, and when all the cops left, I went back into my apartment. Thinking it was all over, I took a few hours to get comfortable enough to fall asleep. But at 2 a.m., I woke up to banging on my front door and heard police. There's no way this is happening right now, I thought to myself. I got up and went to my front door, scared to open it. It was the woman I spoke to earlier. She explained they stayed at my apartment, hidden to watch for that guy in case he showed back up, and he did. They caught him walking up to my front door, thinking he was going to try to find a way in. My heart fell to my stomach when I heard her say that. She then explained he was arrested, and I don't have to worry about him anymore. I thanked her and went back to try and sleep. Unfortunately, I couldn't fall asleep this time. I also don't use Uber Eats anymore when I'm home alone. I was 26 at the time and I'm male. I was in Washington, D.C. on a sort of vacation visiting my then fiancée. I'll call her Sarah for the sake of the story. I was visiting for a graduation she was having for her basic training. It was a big deal for her family, and she asked me to be there for it, so I said why not and booked the flight to be there. I'd be arriving about a week before the rest of her family, so she and I could have some time, just the two of us, before she would be busy with having all of her family there for the occasion. She stayed with me at my hotel during this time, and eventually we decided we wanted to go and explore some of the nearby historical sites that Washington had to offer. I'd never been there, of course, so the idea piqued my interest and we decided to do it. Once we arrived at our location, we spent about 4 hours walking around and seeing all the sights, from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument, the Congress Building, and even the White House. It really was a fun and exciting experience for myself to see all these places, as I had missed out on going on a school trip in high school to visit them. Sarah at the time seemed to appreciate my interest in them as well, and we really enjoyed ourselves. After we finally decided we had enough walking around and were ready to return to the hotel, we used the Uber app to call for a ride. We had used it earlier to arrive and had no issues, so we decided to just use it again for the ride back. Sarah made the request on her phone, while I sat down under some shade and waited. I was pretty tired from all the walking we did, and I could feel my body just ready to get back to the hotel for a long-needed nap. Eventually, after about 10 minutes of waiting, a car pulled up in front of us along the side of the road. Sarah motioned for me that this was the car, as the place they stopped at was not a parking spot or a place a car would just stop at on its own. I stood up and followed her to the car, where she opened the back door and stepped inside, asking the man, "Uber for Sarah?" And he gave a slight nod without saying anything. So I followed her into the car and shut the door behind me. Now looking back on this, I realized how stupid both her and myself were in doing this. We should have asked for the driver's name and verified the car was a match to the one on the app. I didn't have access to any of this myself, and she made the request on her phone, so it didn't really cross my mind at the time to do any of this. As we both sat in the back of the car, which was a gray-colored minivan, the driver didn't speak to us. I found this a bit odd, as any other driver I'd ever had would at the very least greet me once I entered or confirmed my name. But this guy, nothing. He started driving without acknowledging either of us, other than the nod he gave when Sarah asked him if he was our Uber, and I did pick up on how weird it was, but I was tired and didn't really feel like trying to engage with the man myself. I laid my head back and just closed my eyes. I then felt a tap on my arm from Sarah after what felt like only 5 minutes of the drive. I opened my eyes and looked at her, and she didn't speak to me. I could see the look on her face was one of worry, and it had me wondering what exactly she was concerned about. She then pointed to her phone, which was showing the route the Uber would take to drive us back to our hotel. It didn't take me long to realize that the way we were going was not the way the route had said. In fact, it was the opposite way. I could see Sarah's face drain with color shortly after, when a notification popped up on her phone saying our Uber had arrived, followed by a message from the driver asking where we were. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach. It was then I realized how dumb I was by not verifying the car and driver before we just both stepped in. The picture that was on Sarah's phone within the app did not match the driver, and I knew we had gotten ourselves into a situation. I slowly looked back towards the driver, but I didn't say anything. I didn't know what this man's intentions were, or what he was capable of, and honestly, I didn't want to find out. I just knew at that moment, I had to get both Sarah and I out of that car. I leaned forward and told the man that we had changed our minds and would be fine just being let out where we were in an attempt to get us out of the situation without alarming the man of what we knew. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror in the first actual acknowledgement of us he had given since we stepped into the vehicle. I caught his glance as he stared at me without saying a word in what felt like minutes, but was probably only 10 seconds. He didn't stop the car though. He didn't even say a word in response to me, and just kept driving the car as if nothing had been said. My patience had run out, and I knew whatever this man had in store for us wasn't good. I then did the only thing I could think of at that moment, and reached into my pocket, pulling out my pocket knife. I flipped the blade out, and without wasting another second, I told the driver, "I know you're not our Uber driver. I don't know what your plan is here, or what you think you're about to do to us, but I have a knife, and if you don't pull this car over right now, I have no problem using it." The driver's eyes quickly looked at me again within the rearview mirror, and I knew he could see the knife gripped tightly in my hand. He quickly pulled the van over, and I heard the doors unlock. Sarah and I wasted no time in getting out of that car as fast as we could. The moment we were both out, the man sped off. We quickly took a moment to gather ourselves as Sarah was having a panic attack, and I myself was still wrapping my head around what the hell just happened. Sarah quickly pulled out her phone and responded to our actual Uber driver, and informed him of our location and asked if he could come pick us up. The actual driver arrived within a few minutes, and this time we made sure it was the right one. We told him everything that had happened, and it was then that he informed us something that made the blood in my veins go cold. He told us there had been multiple instances recently where people were posing as Uber drivers in the area, as it was an easy way to find many tourists and people not from the area that wouldn't think twice about just getting into a car thinking it was a Lyft or Uber. Apparently, many people had gone missing, and they could only assume the worst. He told us both we were lucky we noticed when we did, and hadn't gotten further away from where we had been picked up, which was probably the only reason the man let us go, and of course the fact that I was armed. We made it back to the hotel without issue, and we quickly reported it to the police. We gave the best description of the man and the car that we both could, and the police told us they'd call us with any information they could find. We never heard back from them, so I assume the man was never caught or found, and that worries me that he could still be out there doing this to others. Again, I realized how stupid we both were after all this, not verifying whose car it was we were getting into. But let this be a reminder to everyone listening, do just that. Always verify your Uber drivers, and always make sure you're aware of your surroundings.
I was working the night shift at my local Waldbaum's back when it used to be open 24 hours a day. There would normally be less than 10 customers throughout my shift, but I wouldn't get to sit around and do nothing though. They wanted me to work on stock when I wasn't helping a customer. It was a bigger Waldbaum's, so oftentimes there may have been one other person in the building, whether it be someone working on stock or someone cleaning. This night, I was the only one working. I was working stock in the cereal aisle when I heard something fall over on the other side of the shelf in the next aisle over. I would always hear the door to the store sliding open. It was the loudest thing ever, so it kinda caught me off guard that there might have been a customer in the building. Of course, it wasn't weird. Yet. Not until I looked to my left and saw a man standing by the edge of the aisle, shooting me a blank stare. "Do you need something, sir?" I asked him. No. Could you just point me to the eggs?" he said. He wasn't normal looking. His face looked weird. Not exactly ugly, just unusual. Like his upper lip kind of came out too far. Almost like a Simpsons character. I was a bit uncomfortable that I had to deal with ringing him up. I hurried to finish the cereal aisle, and when I was done, I began to bring the U-boat cart to the back room. I was stopped halfway when the same guy cut me off through the middle section of the aisle. I want to note this guy was probably in his mid-30s, and at the time, I was only 22, though I looked much younger. The guy stopped me and started trying to make awkward small talk. He started by asking me my name, how old I was, if and where I went to school, and why I was doing the night shift. His questions started to get weirder when he asked me if I went to parties a lot and if I had a girlfriend. I told him I didn't, and then he asked me if I've ever had a boyfriend while putting his hand on my shoulder. I immediately started walking away with the cart, but he followed me. I told him I wasn't into whatever he was thinking about. I went faster and faster until I finally made it to the back storage room. He didn't follow me in. I wasn't supposed to stay back there for extended periods of time to avoid customer theft. I decided it would be best to just wait for him by the register so that he would ring his stuff up and leave. But I waited there for at least 20 minutes. He never came. I decided he was gone, and whether he stole the eggs and something else, there wasn't anything I could do now. I had to go to the bathroom, so I took a quick jog to the back of the store and into the employee bathroom. Moments after sitting on the toilet, my heart dropped into my stomach as I heard the bathroom door open. I choked the urge to say something. Something like, "You can't be in here," but I didn't want to give away my position. I lifted my leg so that I wouldn't be visible from under the stall, and what happened next was simply horrifying. I sat there for the longest time, looking at the floor, not moving a muscle. When I finally looked up, I could see an eye peering through the crack of the stall door. I screamed. I knew I was trapped. I knew I had one shot at making a move. I grabbed the box cutter in my pocket and began sliding it through the crack of the door, forcing him to move his eye away. I took that chance to slam the stall door open in his face and hightail it out of the bathroom and all the way out of the store. I called my boss at least 5 times before he finally picked up and explained everything. He told me to call the cops, and so I did. Of course, the man wasn't in the store anymore by the time the cops showed up. I only did the night shift twice after that, and luckily didn't see the man again. I used to work the night shift at a gas station on the side of some highway in the country. From the hours of 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., the road was pretty dead. I would have maybe 1 or 2 people come in to pick cash in a whole night. It was a very boring and depressing job, especially doing the graveyard shift, but I had just finished college and I needed to pay off my loans. The only reason I kept this job was because my boss threw me an extra $5 an hour for doing the night shift. On this one cold December night, I was doing my usual thing, reading the newspaper, playing games on my phone, and whatnot, when I noticed the headlights of a car pulling off the highway into the parking lot. It was a red pickup truck. Somebody stepped out and shut the door. I went back to reading the paper as I saw that he was standing by the gas pump. I assumed he wasn't paying cash. I looked up a few moments later and saw that he was still standing in the same position, staring at the gas pump. I almost felt obligated to go out and help him. He was obviously confused. I felt a cold chill run up my spine as I saw the 6-foot-something tall man slowly turn his head to face me. I couldn't make out any features of his face, but I knew he was staring at me. I tried to pretend I didn't notice by going back to reading the paper. Of course, I wasn't really reading now. I was a bit shaken by the guy out there. I just wanted him to pay debit or credit and leave. I looked up and gasped as the man was now much closer to the front door of the building. It wouldn't have been so disturbing if it weren't for the fact that he wasn't moving. He was just standing still, as before, still looking in my direction. I walked over to the door to get a closer look. All I could see in his face was still blackness. I locked the door and flipped the open sign to closed on the door. I didn't care if this would possibly get me in trouble. I was not taking a chance because, quite frankly, I was scared shitless. I walked back behind the counter and sat down on one of the containers on the floor just so I couldn't see the man outside anymore. I stayed in that position for a good 5 minutes, texting every friend I have to see who was awake. I was desperate to tell somebody about this. When I finally got up to check that he was gone, I let out a full scream as the man was now right outside the door. I picked up the phone on the counter and called the police. The operator was reluctant to send somebody over because of the way I described the situation, but I persuaded them. I hid behind the counter, balled up like a child. I began to hear heavy thumps at the door, not innocent knocks to catch my attention. I mean thuds and thumps, trying to break down the door. And then eventually it finally stopped. I heard the sound of a car starting outside and then driving off. I looked outside and he was gone. A patrol cop along with a state trooper pulled into the parking lot. I reported the red pickup truck and told them which direction I thought he went in. I couldn't describe his face as all I saw was blackness. Of course, there wasn't much the police could do as the man didn't really do anything. I left that job a few months later to a job in the city. It was 2 years ago. I was called in to do the night shift, 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. at 7-Eleven, since somebody called out. The store was located on a busy road in a rather quiet and rural area. During the night shift, you could expect anywhere from 10 to 20 people come in to buy a beer or something else. This one particular night, there was this one guy, mid-20s, that came in. He started making weird noises, like loud yelling noises. I assumed he had some kind of mental disability. In fact, my brother has a mental disability, so I immediately felt sympathy for the guy. He walked up to the counter without any items, with his head facing me, but his eyes were looking up at the ceiling. I felt uncomfortable. I honestly didn't know how to deal with it. I tried speaking with him, but he only responded in loud noises. I kept checking if he was with someone outside, but he was alone. There weren't any cars in the parking lot, so I assumed he walked. He stood there for so long, looking up at the ceiling and making noises, that I tried to get him out by handing him a bag of chips and telling him he can go. I tried finding some kind of number to call for someone to help him. Then, out of nowhere, he finally turned around and walked out of the store. I felt so horrible for the man, but at the same time, I felt a bit creeped out. About an hour later, the phone on the counter rang. I picked up to hear the familiar yelling sounds of the man from earlier. It caught me off guard. I didn't know what to think, other than this has to be some kind of prank. I hung up on them and was now becoming paranoid of my surroundings, constantly checking the outside through the windows. Come 4 o'clock, the person working after me came in, finally allowing for me to go home. It wasn't my problem anymore. I got home and threw all my stuff on the table, ready to get to sleep. But my phone rang within a minute after entering the door. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would someone be calling at 4 a.m.? I could only imagine it was bad news. I braced myself and picked up the phone to hear the man again. I felt sick to my stomach as I listened to the loud noises he made. I struggled to slam the phone to the receiver. All night I felt like I was being watched, even with all the blinds shut. and I could swear I heard strange noises coming from all over my house. I refused to get any sleep until the sun came up. Weeks passed and I had forgotten about the incident, until one day, when going into the basement for the first time in a while, I found that papers had been scattered all over the floor, and when I went into the basement closet, I found writing on the walls. 7-Eleven had been written in Sharpie on the wall, along with the address to the 7-Eleven I worked at and my house address. The most disturbing part, I also found various kitchen knives along with a large pocket knife sitting in the closet. What started out as seemingly just an innocent person turning into something of a prank ultimately turned into something much more horrifying. He had been living down there for God knows how long, and I'm just grateful that for whatever reason he changed his mind and left, because I haven't seen or heard from him since. All I can say is that man is dangerously ill. I've worked in the K-9 unit for 9 years, and I've worked my fair share of graveyard shifts. I've definitely come across weird things at night, but I'll never forget this one night. I worked with my dog Sammy, a German Shepherd. She was 2 years old at the time and was still kind of new to the job, just like me. I was driving down a road surrounded by crops when I spotted a suspicious-looking white van parked inside the crops. Both doors were open. I flashed my lights to try and draw out whoever was there. Nobody came out, so I parked and scanned the place out quickly. Nobody was in sight, so I took Sammy with me to track down the driver of the van. Sammy started going crazy when we reached the trunk of the van. She was pulling so hard she almost broke off the leash. I opened the trunk to the van, and a blast of foul air hit me in the face. I almost passed out from the mix of the horrible smell and the pure shock of what I saw in the trunk. I counted 7 full body bags, each with a pair of feet sticking out at the bottom. I requested immediate backup with my radio. I heard the sound of a twig snapping nearby, and Sammy just lost it. I lost grip of the leash and she took off into the crops. I pulled out my gun and followed the sounds of her barking. As each and every crop hit me in the face, I felt as if something would reach out and grab me. I stopped when I could no longer hear Sammy's barking. But as I stopped, the sounds of movement did not. I realized I heard movement in all directions. I had never experienced such fear in my life. I stood still as the movement around me stopped. And then, out of nowhere, I felt 2 arms wrap around my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't fight. I was going to die. And then, I heard the sound of Sammy's bark, followed by the scream of the man choking me as Sammy bit down on his leg. The next thing I did is something that I still question if it was appropriate doing to this day. I turned around and pulled the trigger, killing the man. I grabbed Sammy by the leash and ran all the way back to the car. I could tell people were following us from behind. I managed to make it to the car safely and drive a 1/4 mile down the road. I didn't stop to see which way they went. I didn't hold my ground. I fled like a coward. I cared much more about our lives than I did this job, and I'll still say that today. But it still pains me knowing how much of a coward I was. Backup arrived shortly, but the van was gone. I even failed to get the plate number on dashcam video, or even just writing it down. This was within my first few months on the force, but it made me feel like absolute shit for months to come. I, someone who was sworn to protect, let a van full of killers get away.
My dad always loved going crazy with the Christmas lights when I was young. He was an overachiever with it, and I always had to have the most impressive display on the block. The year of 2010 was no exception. He set the lights up on timers so that they'd flash along to certain Christmas songs, which was becoming a popular trend in 2010. We had a bunch of onlookers and people stop by and take videos. My dad always ate that up. This was on a night where there was a light snowfall, and it was below freezing out, so not the weather a lot of onlookers would want to come and check out the display. There were a couple that we noticed, a woman and then a man. The woman left after a few minutes. The man stayed and admired it. We saw a smile on his face. He stayed for quite some time actually, and I knew my dad loved that. Eventually it got late, and it started snowing a little heavier, so my dad pulled the plug on the lights for the night. Quite literally pulled the plug. The lights and music outside stopped, and on that note, that meant the night was approaching its end. Everyone went upstairs to shower or brush their teeth or do whatever they had to do. I went to my room upstairs and looked out the window, as a curiosity thing to see how many people still had their lights on at this hour. Only a couple houses. But I picked up on more than just that. That man who was admiring the lights was still outside on the sidewalk facing the house, even though all the lights were now off. I called my dad over, a bit confused and concerned. He came to the window with me and looked out. "What do you think he's doing?" I asked. "I don't know," my dad said. We both assumed the guy might be waiting for the lights to turn back on. Either that or he may be loony, or both. My dad said just lower the blinds and ignore it, he'll go away eventually. I brushed my teeth, got some water, then turned off my light and climbed into bed. I heard the little flakes of snow tapping on the window, a sound I always found very relaxing, but I wasn't relaxed. I was wide awake and curious. I had to look out my window. I pulled the blind up just a little to sneak a peek outside. The man was gone, but I could see footprints in the snow on our front lawn, which started from the sidewalk. Curiosity got the best of me. I tiptoed downstairs to the front door, which has 3 square glass windows at the top of it. I peeked through that glass, and I wish I hadn't. He was standing on the other side of the door, looking at the glass window, a big smile on his face, accentuating his crow's feet and smile lines. He had a mustache and was wearing one of those old-time wool caps and a large black coat. He had a look of crazy in his eye. For that brief couple of seconds I looked at him before falling back screaming. Everyone came out of their rooms in response to my screams. I pulled the front door open for my dad to see. The man wasn't on the stoop anymore, but we saw him quickly walking across the street into the park. My dad, brother, and I all rushed to put on our shoes, skipping the coats so to not waste time. We chased after him by following his footprints into the park. I was so cold it felt like thousands of icicles were stabbing my body. We got across the street to the park and went into the trees, but following the footprints got harder under the trees as less snow had accumulated, until there was not enough snow at all to even leave footprints in. We had to give up and run back home to warmth. Technically, we don't know if that man did anything illegal, just downright disturbing and creepy. Maybe he was messing with my family, maybe he was mentally ill. None of these questions will ever be answered, though. I was on my way home from working a graveyard shift on Christmas Eve night. It was a snowy night. The roads were icy and slippery. I was driving slow and cautious, listening to Christmas music. There were next to no cars on the road at all, just the occasional snowplow truck. I was on a quiet service road when I came to a red light. There were 2 cars in front of me. The light quickly turned green, but the cars didn't move. I'm not the type to honk, if ever, but after 30 seconds of neither of the cars moving, I finally tapped on the horn. Still nothing. The car in front of me wasn't even honking at the car in front of him. Another 20 seconds passed, and I honked again. I noticed someone on the sidewalk watching this happen. I thought he must be thinking, what an asshole, whoever's in the front car. We were sitting there so long now that the light changed to red again. Like I said, I'm not the type to honk, so I'm definitely not the type to get out of my car and confront someone. But this was too much. I was exhausted and wanted to go home. I got out from my car and walked over to the car in front of me, which for the record was still on. Both of them were. When I knocked on the window, I looked inside. The car was empty. I walked to the car in front of it, and it was empty too. There was no way to explain this. 2 running cars blocking a lane. No one inside either of them. No signs of an accident or anything. I was ready to ask that guy on the sidewalk if one of these cars were his, but when I looked in the direction where he was standing, he wasn't there anymore. The light turned green. Okay, whatever. I was gonna drive around them on the opposite side of the road and be gone. So that's what I did. I was way too unsettled to stick around there. A few blocks down, I saw a cop car parked in an empty parking lot. Unfortunately, I missed the entrance, so I started honking my horn and flashing my lights to get his attention, and it worked. He turned his car on and exited the parking lot to pull up behind me on the road. It felt like he was pulling me over, kind of, because he exited his car to walk up to mine. I didn't leave my car as a respect thing, I guess. I lowered my window and told him about the 2 weird abandoned cars back there and how they were obstructing traffic. He thanked me and said he'd check it out. Then his attention turned to something in the back seat, and he said, "Why is he laying on the floor like that?" "What?" I said. I turned around and saw a hooded man laying on the floor of my car. I screamed in front of the cop. I stepped out and yelled at the cop that I didn't know him. The cop drew his gun and ordered the guy to step out with his hands raised. He did so. When the man was in handcuffs, I recognized him as the guy standing on the side of the road. So I told the cop. The cop called for backup. He shook my hand and told me he'd take care of the rest, and to get home safe, and we wished each other a Merry Christmas. I drove home with a mix of emotions, but that Christmas, all I know is I had a newfound appreciation for police officers. My wife and I live in a duplex in Queens, New York. Last month, 2 upper middle-aged women moved in next door. We never had the chance to greet them the first few days. They seemed very quickly in and out at first. On, say, the 4th day, I caught one of the women carrying a box from her car into her side of the house, so I walked out to finally greet her. Her name is Frances, and she seemed normal enough, but she also seemed like she was in a hurry, so I didn't steal too much of her time. The next day was Christmas Eve, so my wife and I were preparing to host my sister and their families. During our Christmas Eve dinner, which was going completely normal, we all went silent and looked at the door when we all heard the sound of someone trying to push open the locked door. I got up and opened the door to see who it was. By the time I opened the door, there was no one on the stoop, but there was this woman walking down the sidewalk. I began to call out, but stopped mid-first word, deciding not to even bother. Maybe she had the wrong house, and that's what I said to my family when I sat down. Wrong house. My family all left around 9 that night. After that, the wife and I began our cleanup. I was mid-washing dishes when the front door opened and then shut pretty aggressively. In my head, it could have been my wife or any of my sisters returning because they forgot something. When I called for my wife and she answered from a different room, I knew it wasn't her. So I turned off the sink, dried my hands, and walked into the living room. There was a woman sitting in my big recliner chair in the corner. She was looking at the wall, muttering something to herself. I recognized her to be one of the women from next door. My wife entered the room and gasped. I calmly told the woman she was on the wrong side of the house. Then she looked at me and continued muttering inaudible words. There was clearly some form of dementia. I told my wife to go hurry and knock on the neighbor's door. My wife left and was back with Frances surprisingly quickly. Frances seemed very relieved and grabbed the woman by the arm and pulled her off the chair and out of the house to their side. Frances came back a minute later to apologize and explain that her sister has what's known as sundowning syndrome, a form of dementia in which the symptoms get worse as the day goes on. I asked a question I felt rather important, which was, does she get aggressive at all in this state? I didn't like her answer. She said it's just best to leave her alone later in the day when she starts acting up. I wasn't overly friendly considering I was pretty taken aback by what just happened, but I wasn't rude either. Frances left, and my wife and I just looked at each other with these what the hell just happened looks on our faces. Anyway, this time I remembered to lock the door. The next day we went to my wife's parents' house for Christmas dinner. It was a nice time. We got home late since they live about an hour away, so I'd say we got home around 11. We cuddled up in bed and watched whatever Christmas movie was still on at that point. After that, our Christmas was over, and we cut the TV and went to sleep. My eyes opened to a dark room. I sensed I had been woken up by a noise. I looked around the room and spotted her walking out of the room and into the hall. "Honey, are you okay?" "Huh?" I heard next to me in a groggy, half-asleep voice. My wife was still laying next to me in the bed. I leaped out of bed, looked down the hall, and saw the tall, lanky figure of who I could only assume to be that woman from next door. She noticed me in the doorway. I yelled "wrong house" before slamming the bedroom door shut and locking it. I heard her march down the hall back to our door and try opening it. She tried pushing and shoving the door, making these weird, angry noises. I called the police and said our new neighbor with dementia had broken in and might possibly be violent. I requested they ring the neighboring door to wake up Frances and get her to come in here. Waiting for the police was a miserable, nail-biting experience. When they finally did come, I left our room and went to the front door to let them in. Frances came in with the police, extremely worried and apologetic. Her sister was walking around in our basement, all confused-like. Frances took her back to the other side once again, then came back out to talk with the police and I. She expressed sincere sorrow and gratitude for me not hurting her. I told her firmly this was not okay, and warned if this happened again that I would consider pressing charges. From that point on, we obviously locked everything, including windows. Frances' sister eventually went to go live with their mother instead. Thank God for us. As a father of two, Christmas is already a stressful time of year for me. 2 Christmases ago, my kids were still in love with the idea of Santa Claus. After watching the Polar Express as a family, my wife tucked the kids into bed and she started putting the presents under the tree. I didn't really do any of that stuff. I just laid in bed watching something on TV waiting for her to come up. By the time she was done, we were ready for bed. We're early birds when it comes to sleep. I'm also a pretty good sleeper. I'm lucky enough to be able to knock out within a few minutes. And waking up in the middle of the night is unusual for me, which is why I was confused at first when I woke up that night. Then I realized why. My daughter Kelsey was in the room, saying "Daddy" over and over. I rubbed my eyes and asked her what's wrong. She had this cute little happy smile on her face as she said, "Santa's here." I smiled back at her, saying, "Yes, he is." I told her she better be quiet and hurry back to her room so that Santa doesn't find out she's awake. She giggled and said okay, and walked out of my room, leaving the door open. I laid back down and tried to get back to sleep. A couple minutes later, I heard some shuffling around downstairs. I sighed because I knew Kelsey probably went down there to open her presents early, which is what she did the year before. I reluctantly got up and walked towards the stairs. As I started clomping down the stairs, the noises I was hearing ceased. I got to the bottom step and I was in the living room by the tree. The lights on the tree were still on, I guess because it was Christmas Eve night. All the presents seemed to still be there, so Kelsey wasn't going through them after all. Still, I walked around the living room and dining room whispering her name just to see if she was hiding somewhere. I gave up and went back up the stairs. I was about to go to my wife and I's room when I decided I'd step into Kelsey's room just to check if she was in there. And she was. She was sitting up in her bed, wide awake. I asked her why she went downstairs when I told her to go to bed. She whispered excitedly, "It wasn't me. Santa's down there." I tried to begin a sentence, but stuttered, then froze. I ran down the stairs and turned on the lights, looking around the whole house. Then I found that the back door was open. Nobody locked it. Someone had broken into our house on Christmas Eve night, right under our noses, and stole a few of the presents left under the tree, according to my wife. The worst part about this is I heard whoever was down there. In fact, my 7-year-old daughter did too. Hell, she even came into my room and basically gave me a warning. It still kills me to this day.